Do you? Because I hear it all the
Nope.
time.
Just mine, I'm sure. Mine's bad.
No comment on that.
That's why I mute all the time.
You're better than me. I'm always.
All right. Can you
But
confirm that we have made it to Facebook? We're probably not on my page, though.
I do not see us on your Facebook. We're probably on my Facebook. Yes, we are.
Okay, I don't see it on
Great.
Victor's either. I concur.
That's fine. That's fine.
So
Heather took over. That's fine. That's what it is. All right. Give me just a second. And we need Rabbi to have a little co-hosting ability. Okay. All right. Let me just verify that YouTube is running. Yeah, it looks good. All right, Rabbi, you're up.
I think Rabbi's frozen.
am I?
No, you're good.
All right. All right. We ready?
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. All right, let's get going. Welcome to the Mishnah Walks weekly Torah study. This week we'll be doing questions and answers with your hosts, Victor and Heather, and Ben, the ethereal. All right, so we're going to start with our beginning prayer, what you would say when you enter in a house of study. Of course, this is our digital house of study. Oh, how did that happen? Different things are happening.
All right, I'm multitasking at the moment.
You're multitasking? All right, I'm all good. Heather, would you like to read the prayer that we say upon entering a house of study?
If you can pick somebody else to help you, I've got a few things I got to do in the background here.
No problem. Do we have any volunteers? You don't have to read the whole thing. Just like a word or a phrase, whatever you feel comfortable to do. But even one word is better than nothing.
I can go.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, okay, I will start.
Go ahead, b'chavod.
Right. Yehi ratzon mikfanicha.
All right, this is a lamed. Mille.
Milfanicha.
Milfanecha.
Milfanecha. Adonai. Eloheinu.
One more time. Elohai.
Elohai.
Go.
Okay. Shelo. Achashel.
Very good. Okay, now there's a dot in the kaf, which means it's a hard K.
Achashel.
There you go.
Devar.
Right? This hirik, the dot's always an E.
Okay. Bidvar.
You got it.
Halacha.
All right, now let me translate. May it be your will before you, O eternal, my God, that I shall not stumble in a matter of practical application of your Torah. That's what we call halacha. Do we have someone who would like to continue?
I try.
All right, bechavod. Good job.
Shelo Oma Tameh Tahov Ve'al. Oh, Tahov Tameh.
Make sure you're doing that.
Tahua Tameh.
All right. You want to continue? Up to here.
Okay. Ve'al Mutar Amur.
One more time.
Asur.
Yeah, very good.
Ve'al Asur Mutar.
All right. And when we pronounce the oo, you just want to do an oo instead of uwe. Ooh. Sometimes it might actually be an uwe, but generally not. So asur, just a short oo, asur. Natargem, let's translate. So may it be your will before you that we not stumble in a matter of halacha, and that we should not say regarding what is impure that it is pure, tahor. that we should not say regarding what is tahor, pure, that it's tameh, impure. Or regarding what is permitted, mutar, that it's asur, forbidden. Wa'al asur mutar, nor should we say regarding what is forbidden, that is permitted. Right? Do we have another volunteer? Again, you don't have to read an entire phrase, just one word. It's a quick opportunity for a little Hebrew practice.
Baal, Ekoshel, Bidvar, Halakha,
Right? There's no dot, so it's a
Halakha, Vaish, Vaish,
right? If it's the dot on the left side of the scene, then it's a sa, like snake or snack.
Vai, Vei, Yish,
Yes,
Yis, Vaish, Me,
yes.
Yish,
S like snack or snake or sink.
Vais,
Yes.
Metha, Menhu,
Yeah, one more time. وَيِسْمَحُ. وَيِسْمَحُ.
Wais, Mehu,
You got it.
Be, Haber, Habera,
All right.
Haberai,
Haberai.
Haberai.
Yeah, very good. Let's translate it. And may I not stumble in a matter of halacha, and my fellows rejoice with me. Would you like to continue, or we can get someone else? Whatever you prefer.
I'll try.
All right, Kavod, you're doing great.
Baal, Lu, Haberai, Bid,
Yes.
Bidvar, Halakha.
Halacha. Yes. Now here's a typo. This should be a S, not a sha. So the dot above should be on the left. So esmah bohem. And I shall rejoice with them.
Yeah.
All right. So if we are cautious to not call impure what is pure, and to not call what is impure pure, and in the same vein, if we are careful to not call permitted what is forbidden, and to be equally careful to not forbid what is actually permitted, then we will not stumble in a matter of halacha, and we will all rejoice together, have a big party in the world to come, right? And we shall rejoice with them, with our fellows. Okay, kol hakavod. So it is a new month, and we are going to, first we're going to do Havdalah. Havdalah is the separation between the Shabbat and the new week. So ideally, we would say that as soon as Shabbat ends, right, when 3 medium-sized stars appear. But if you did not do it on Saturday night, Shabbat night, then you're able to do it up to midweek. Right, so we're looking at a contents, table of contents, and our Sidur. We're looking for Havdalah. In the middle side, you'll see it transliterated, and over here, you'll see it translated. So, Shabbat conclusion, also known as Havdalah. Page 45, Havdalah. There it was. I'm going everywhere except for where I need to go. Here we go. And do we have a volunteer? First, let's read the English. All right, again, we're doing this for practice.
I will start with the English.
Go ahead.
At the end of Shabbat, after the appearance of 3 medium-sized stars, one officiates the distinguishment between Sabbath and the new week in the following order, and over a cup of wine or grape juice. First, one blesses on the drink, then on a fragrance, then over a flame. If a flame is on hand, one then says the blessing of separation and drinks. Just as with Kiddush, it is forbidden to begin drinking, eating, or doing a labor until one has officiated the separation.
All right, kol hakavod. Would you like to do the first baracha? You can just skip this part so that way we can make it shorter. You could just say the first word, most worthy are you, or most worthy of praise are you, and then go to the end.
Of course, yeah, the first part is the easiest, so I don't see why I need to skip over it. It's everyone says it like 1,000 times.
Well, what I mean is,
5,000.
a lot of let everybody be aware, it's permitted to say God's name and divine titles,
Mhm.
even when you are not praying, if you're doing it for the sake of learning or in a very reverent mind frame and a very reverent in a context of reverence. But in the mainstream Orthodox establishment, there is extreme sensitivity to that, for better or worse. So even if you are doing it just for the sake of learning, a lot of people, meaning a lot of people who maybe you don't want to get on their bad side,
Right.
let's say like if you're going through a conversion process or trying to integrate into a more traditional community, even if something is technically permitted, but if it's like very much frowned upon in an established community that you want to join, it's better to avoid doing it, even if it's technically permitted, as long as you keep in mind that, you know, what is permitted, what's forbidden is forbidden. But there is a concept of voluntarily restraining ourselves from something that we know is permitted. And that's different from saying it's forbidden, but in order for peace or for practical necessity, right? So
Right.
for that reason, I'm
Ad
saying,
Hashem?
come again?
You could say Ad Hashem.
You could. I'm really not a big fan of that. And also, it's really not that widespread, at least in the Hebrew speaking world. I don't think I ever heard anyone ever say that in 15 years being in Israel. But I think it exists in English, and maybe
That's where I
somebody.
heard it actually was in Israel.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was it an English speaker?
Yeah. And well, yeah, he grew up in New York and
Okay, so
moved there
that's
40 years ago, maybe, but yeah.
right. Okay. So I'm not saying that's not forbidden. You can say that, but I'd recommend people to either skip over it if you want to avoid ruffling feathers unnecessarily, or use an actual Hebrew word that uh, that may be a stand-in, like Hashem, or yeah, that's the most simple, Hashem.
Okay.
Right, but I'm trying to say for the sake of brevity, we could just skip over that.
Okay, for the sake of
So
brevity,
much for
I will skip over
brevity.
that.
Yeah.
So we can say Bore Peri Hagefen.
That's right. So you would say Baruch, most worthy are you, creator of the fruit of the vine. Okay, and then you don't drink yet. Normally you would drink as soon as you say the blessing. But in Havdalah, we keep holding the cup of wine or grape juice, and we don't drink until we finished the Havdalah blessings. All right. Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba. You're going to say the first word, and then you can skip toward the end. When you're actually doing this in practice, you could say all these words.
Bore, most worthy are you.
Baruch, Baruch.
Excuse me. Baruch. Baruch, most worthy are you. Yeah, I'm looking at Bore. Bore, me, many,
Me,
me,
ne.
mine, basamim.
Good, Vasamim. All right. So that translates as most worthy are you, O eternal, our exceedingly powerful authority, King of all existence, creator of various fragrances. Now you have two other blessings that you could say instead of that if you know the type of herb that you're looking at, whether it's a herb technically or whether it's like a hard-stemmed quote unquote herb. It's not technically an herb, but that's a little more advanced for Hebrew. All right. Mi haba, baracha haba'ah. So first we did the wine or the drink, then we did the fragrance, and we still haven't drunk yet. And then if you have fire on hand, meaning it's already lit, and if you already said Havdalah in the nighttime formal prayer, the Amidah, then you can light here at this point and then say it. But if you did not say Amidah, if you didn't say the nighttime formal prayer yet, then you should not light a fire if it's not already there in order to say this blessing. Unless you already said, you could say it in short, most worthy are you who separates between the holy and mundane, and then you could light it. But if you did not say that, you did not say any prayer like that, and you're just doing Havdalah, and there's no fire on hand, you would skip this. We're not supposed to light a fire until we have said Havdalah. Right? So Baruch Atah, most worthy are you, creator of the luminescence of fire. Right? Baruch Atah, Bore Me'ore Ha'esh, Mi Haba. Okay, so after you have said a blessing over the site of fire, then you would conclude with the actual core blessing of Havdalah, which fulfills a Torah obligation, an obligation by direct command of God. It's in the Ten Commandments that you should remember the Sabbath to sanctify it or to keep it holy. So the word remember and the word to mention are the same word in Hebrew. So we derive from the command to remember the Sabbath that we are to mention the Sabbath in order to distinguish it. All right. So the mentioning of the sanctity of Shabbat is how we sanctify Shabbat at its beginning and at its end with Havdalah. So you would say, most worthy of worship are you who distinguishes Hammavdil ben Kodesh Lahol, who distinguishes between the holy and the mundane, and uven or lahoshech, and between light and darkness, uven Israel lagoyim, and between Israel and the nations, uven yom hashavi'i, and between the seventh day, l'sheshet yemei hama'aseh, between the seventh day and the 6 days of the act of creation. Most worthy of worship are you, O Eternal, who distinguishes between the sanctified or the holy and the mundane. Baruch Hammavdil ben Kodesh Lahor. Right? And everybody present would say Amen.
Amen.
Right? So it's a new moon. As soon as you see the new moon, you would say this blessing. We're just going to say it in English for the sake of brevity. Right? And this is not fulfilling our obligation because we have not just seen the new moon. But when you see it, you can say this blessing. We have a volunteer, and you can do this up to about halfway in the month. Right? What you would do is when you see the new moon, you say this prayer of praise.
I'll read.
Kol hakavod.
Worshipful are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who by his utterance created the heights of the heavens and all the hosts with the breath of his mouth. He gave them a fixed law and schedule, that their tasks not be changed. They are happy and rejoice to do the will of their possessor, trustworthy doers of truth. And he said to the moon, be renewed as a diadem of splendor to those born of the womb, that in the future they shall likewise be renewed, to glorify their Maker for the glory of his dominion. Worshipful are you, O Lord, renewer of months.
Wow, that was beautiful. Great reading.
Thank you.
Bo'o namshich. Now we're going to move on to our weekly schedule. All right, we are in the list of the 613 commandments. That's the listing of the 613 everlasting conditions of God's covenant between himself and the people of Israel. All right, so I believe last week we stopped at prohibitive commandment 94. So we're going to continue on 95. I will read 13. By reading 13 once a week.
I
Okay,
think we ended on 107 last
107?
week.
All right. Leave it to Heather to get us on track.
Chop, chop. I put a list in for the Zoom members for the reading order.
Great. And just to be clear, I do that every week just to show how much we need Heather. That's...
Oh yeah, we knew that. Repeating
All right,
107.
Yeah. Oh, let's repeat it. Okay, let's go ahead.
Not to substitute another animal for one selected as a sacred offering, as Leviticus 27:10 states, do not exchange it or substitute another for it. 108. Not to change the designation of a consecrated animal from one sacrifice to another, as Leviticus 27:26 states regarding a firstling animal. A person should not consecrate it, i.e., he should not consecrate it as another sacrifice.
All right, we have a volunteer for the next. Miswa haba'ah. Next commandment. Miswa haba'ah. If you
Not
want
to
to be next, say ani haba or ani haba'ah if you're a female.
ani haba'ah. Not to redeem a firstling kosher animal, as Numbers chapter 18, verse 17 states, nevertheless, a firstling ox do not redeem.
All right, mi haba. Who's next?
Ani haba.
Ihaba.
Oh, we got a competition.
I said it first. I said it first.
Well,
All right,
we
go
have,
ahead.
I think we have a list.
That's fine.
Yeah, I actually I put a reading order in the
Oh, okay.
chat.
That's what you meant.
so-
Okay, so whoever would like, whoever.
Okay.
I mean, whoever's on that list, you go
Let
by.
me-
Okay,
let me-
go with the list.
Let's go with the list, okay? Not to sell the tithe of cattle, as Leviticus 27:33 states, it shall not be redeemed.
Mi haba.
Ani haba'ah. Not to sell a field that has been dedicated, as Leviticus 27:28 states, it shall not be sold.
Ani haba. Not to redeem a field that has been dedicated, as Leviticus Ibid states, it shall not be redeemed.
All right, mi haba.
Ani haba'ah.
Beautiful. Kol hakavod.
Not to work with consecrated animals, as Deuteronomy 15:19 states, do not work with the firstling ox.
All right, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we read 113?
I may have made a mistake. Let's read that. Not to serve the head of a bird brought as a sin offering. Leviticus 5:8 states, he shall pinch off his head without separating it.
Whew. Painful.
How does one pinch off a head without separating it?
I'm so glad you asked.
It's dangling by a thread or a feather in this case.
Yeah. Remember the priest would have a thumbnail, basically. He uses his
Oh.
nail to do it. And if he messes it up and it does come off, there's a place for that bird to go, because it's no longer can be used as a sacrifice. So there's a place at the altar where it would be placed.
That's why we don't want to sin, you guys. We got to stop sinning. We don't want to see decapitated birds. That's terrible.
Okay.
All right.
I
Well,
think I'm
haba'ah.
up. All
Kol
right.
hakavod.
Ani haba. Not to work with consecrated animals, as Deuteronomy 15:19 states, do not work with your firstling ox.
All right, mi haba. Who's next? Mi
Ani
haba.
haba'ah.
All right.
Not to shear consecrated animals, as Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 19 states, do not shear your firstling sheep.
Say it together. Mi haba.
Ani aba.
All right.
Ani aba. Not
It's
to
okay.
slaughter.
In modern Hebrew, haba and abba sound the same
Not to
because they don't
slaughter.
pronounce the he. They don't distinguish between he and aleph typically. So ani abba, ani haba, same thing.
Okay, 116. Not to slaughter the paschal sacrifice while one possesses hametz, as Exodus 23:18 states, do not sacrifice the blood of my offering in the presence of hametz.
Beautiful. Miswa haba'ah. Next commandment. Miswa haba'ah.
Ani haba'ah. Not to allow the sacrificial portions of the partial sacrifice to become disqualified by remaining overnight, as Exodus 23:18 states, do not allow the fat of my festive offering to remain until the morning.
Miswa haba'ah.
Ani haba. Not to allow the meat of the paschal sacrifice to remain overnight, as Exodus 12:10 states, do not leave over any of it until the morning.
All right, now we're going to switch it up a little bit. The word for turn, as in my turn, is tur. I'm sorry, tur. Keep it simple. Tur. So, if you want to say my turn, you would say tur Sheli. Sheli is mine, right? And when you refer to yourself, not with a verb, but just with a first person pronoun like I or mine, there's no difference between male and female. Excuse me. So whoever wants to be next or whoever's next on the list, please say it. Tur Sheli. My turn. Tur with an R. Sheli.
Tur shali.
Kol hakavod.
Not to allow the meat of the Hagiga sacrifice to remain until the third day, as Deuteronomy 16:4 states, do not leave over any of the meat. According to the oral tradition, we have learned that the verse refers to the Hagiga sacrifice offered on the 14th of Nisan. The phrase until the morning in that verse refers to the morning of the second day of Pesach, the third day after the sacrifice was offered.
Right, miswa ha'aharona, the final miswa. Miswa ha'aharona, mi haba batur. Mi haba batur. Who is next in line? Mi haba batur.
Tur sheli.
Beautiful.
Not to allow the meat of the second paschal sacrifice to remain until the morning, as Numbers 9:12 states, do not leave any of it until the morning.
All right, now should be easy to remember where we left off because 120 is the number of.
I'll be taking bets on that.
Okay, now. Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, right? The men of the Great Assembly.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Sefer HaMitzvot. I like that confidence.
Is there a time for a question there?
Hey, if anybody has any questions, sure. I already closed it, but we can.
So
I'll
we're
get
gonna
back
need to
open.
see it. 108 was interesting.
Sorry, it's taking us time to reload.
Well, I can ask while it's coming up.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's the firstborn offering, or the firstborn has to be set aside as a firstborn offering. It cannot also serve a second purpose. As in other words, I'll also go do a Thanksgiving offering with it. I'll double up. So it has, if you bring in a Thanksgiving offering, you can't go grab a firstling, a firstborn. That's how
All
I
right.
read that.
108, you said, right?
I think so.
Right here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. Did you have a question? Because I was reading the comments.
Well, actually, I was just wanting to
Point that out.
confirm it. Yeah. Is there anything in the Hebrew that jumps out or says anything
So I can, when
special?
it comes to sacrifices in the temple, generally, I mean, there are some exceptions where I'm more familiar, but generally, I am not qualified to give an expert opinion or, comment on details of how the offerings are done in practice because I've only read through those laws once or twice. And there's
So
several books.
are you saying you haven't actually gone to the temple and done this?
Well,
Isn't that a
you don't have to
requirement?
go to the temple to do it to actually be familiar with it. But what I'm saying is, in addition to have never actually done it in practice, I'm also not the most qualified to talk about these topics. But I can talk about what it says at face value in the commandment, though our sages may have understood it in some way different from what I might assume. So I don't like to go into too much detail unless I prepare in advance. So we're talking about this mitzvah, right? 108?
Yes, sir.
All right, so if I'm translating directly from here, it says, that you should not change or perhaps exchange, but literally it just says change, one consecrated animal, whether it's plural, it's technically it's plural here, from being one sacrifice to another sacrifice. As it states, Shana Amar, Bibchor, regarding the firstborn, Lo yaqdish ish atha, right? That a person should not consecrate it. That is to say, Kelomar, that is to say, Lo yaqdishannu laqurban aher. That's to say that you should not consecrate it to a different offering. And that does make sense contextually, because if you're already talking about an offering, i.e. the firstborn offering, it's already consecrated. So what else could it mean by saying you shouldn't consecrate it if it's already consecrated? It means you shouldn't consecrate it to some other purpose.
Not to be repurposed. In other words,
Right.
a firstborn is already set aside. And it's by default,
Correct.
without even
Right.
stating anything. It belongs to someone else. You can't do something
Right.
with it.
So
Yeah.
that's a example of trying to understand the Bible in context. Right? So it's already consecrated. So then we have to try to understand this in light of that. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
Mm.
Not to me at face value, at least. All right. Were there any other questions about the highly summarized list of the 613? All right. In that case, we'll move on to Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Commandments, where we have another form of summary of each of the 613, but instead of being extremely terse, 1 or 2 sentences, instead it's 1 or 2 paragraphs. So I believe we are on the 28th Miswa Aseh. We're on the 28th proactive commandment.
Nahon.
Oh, so finally. All right. So you may have the honor, Miss Heather.
That is that he commanded the priest to burn incense every day, twice on the golden altar. And that is his, may he be blessed, saying, on it Aharon shall burn incense of spices. He shall burn it every morning when he arranges the lamps. The regulations of this commandment and the process of burning it every day have already been explained at the beginning of Keritot
Yes, very good.
and various places in Tractate Tamid.
All right, see Parashat Tesaveh. And also in the Mishnah Torah, the Code of Jewish Law, you can find this elaborated upon in detail in the book regarding daily offerings and additional offerings, chapter 3. Let's read one more, since these are pretty short. All right, so this is 29, proactive commandment, Miswa Aseh, 29.
Torshali.
Beautiful, Tur Shali, that's right.
That is that he commanded us to burn a fire on the altar every day continuously, and that is his, may he be exalted, saying, a continual fire shall be kept burning on the altar, not to go out. Leviticus 6:6. And this is only possible with his having commanded to place fire continually on the wood in the morning and in the afternoon, as it is explained in the 2nd chapter of Yoma and in Tractate Tamid. And in the explanation, they said that even though the fire descends from the heavens, it is a commandment to bring it from the commoners, humans. And the laws of this commandment, meaning the arrangement of the fire, which they are to do every day on the altar, have already been explained in Yoma and in Tamid. See Parashat Tezvah, Sav, Mishnah Torah, daily offerings and additional offerings too.
All right, beautiful. Okay, that concludes with the summaries of the 613 commandments, the stipulations, the conditions of God's everlasting covenant between himself and his people. Any questions about the last two that we read from Sefer HaMitzvot? Dana Martina. All right, so in the comments I saw when we were talking about Hebrew, the new term I introduced you guys to, which please write it down. This is really the only way you can truly advance in Hebrew, especially if you're not continually immersed in it living in Israel. And that is to use Hebrew as much as you can, any chance you can get away with it. So of course you can't do it nonstop with every person because nobody got time for that. But especially in the context of Torah learning, even if we're not doing the entire class in Hebrew fluently, we can at least build up over time our vocabulary with short, practical phrases that we can quickly learn. So that's what we're doing here when I give you like a short phrase, Tur Shali, my turn, Mi Haba, who's next. So someone asked, Do we say hatur sheli with the article ha? So, I mean, it depends on what you want to say. Ha is a definite article. What that means is you're specifying something. So if you say hatur, you mean the turn. Generally, people do not say the turn is mine. They would just usually say my turn. If you said the turn is mine, it's not grammatically wrong. It's just not the way people would usually say it, because definite articles are usually reserved for something very specific, right? Something definitive. And if this is just one turn, one tour, I can't straighten up the languages. If this is just one turn among many, many turns in a situation, then there's nothing particularly unique about it, right? So that could be the reason why we don't normally say that. It's a good question. And it's not grammatically wrong, right? You could say either. But if you say hatur sheli, you're saying like the turn is mine, right? And people would be like, well, what's so special about that turn? Maybe you want to say, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be too wordy. So what's the topic on the floor today, Habibi?
Oh, I think we messed up and we put all the questions in Heather's domain. So she gathered up a whole bunch of stuff, really cleaned out the
Yeah.
stalls. No.
That's a gross image. So, so Heather, maybe we can give priority to any questions that our members have asked, and then we can move on to whatever intrigues you the most of whatever remains.
Right. I'm going to start us off. Last time we did a Q&A, I asked you a question and you wanted some time to think about it.
Oh boy, and of course I thought about it.
So last time I asked, I recently read an article that proclaimed every home should have a charity box, a prayer book, a book of Psalms, and a book of the Torah prominently displayed. What would you recommend that every home should have and prominently display? And
All right.
you responded last time a Tanakh or a Humash, and the
Let's
first two.
define these. What is a Tanakh and a Chumash? What's the difference between those?
A Humash would be just the Torah, and the Tanakh would also include the prophets.
And the writings. That's right.
And the writings, yeah.
Okay.
And you said the first two volumes of the Mishneh Torah, the book of knowledge and the book of love.
Very good, yeah. And after that, I would say the holidays, the book of Zamanim, the book of times. And then after that, I would say Sefer Kedusha, the book of holiness, which regards illicit relations, forbidden relations, and also proper behavior between the sexes, between different genders. And also it includes the laws regarding kosher and unkosher type foods, proper slaughter. One might say, how could you not make that the first? It's such a severe thing. The reason I wouldn't make it the first, and what I'm saying is just my opinion, of course. There are no like set law from the great Sanhedrin stating what I'm stating, because the Mishneh Torah didn't even exist yet when they were still in function on the Temple Mount. But the reason I would not put Sefer Kedusha number one is because of foundations. So Sefer Mada, the book of knowledge, regards the most basic and fundamental concepts, like not serving other gods, what are the parameters for recognizing a true prophet and identifying a false prophet, and and proper etiquette, basic decency between humans. In contrast to Sefer Kedusha, the book of holiness, which regards illicit relations and like kosher laws and everything, I wouldn't prioritize that over the first that I just mentioned, because number one, when it comes to illicit relations, most people have at least a broad or general understanding of that to some extent, right? On a most basic level. And also, it's not something that even if somebody transgresses in, it's not something that that most people normally are faced with every single day. Lust, sure, but most people already know about lust, right? You don't need a whole book to tell you about that. And kosher laws, most people are familiar with the kosher laws on the most basic and fundamental level. And also, the kosher laws are not an end unto themselves, but rather, as it says in the Torah, God gave them to Israel to sanctify Israel, to make us distinct. So that's part of strengthening the cohesion and the bond among those who share common faith in the God of Israel, who gave his Torah. But it is not an end unto itself. It's not a foundation of foundations, even though it's important, and it is a direct commandment of God. So that's the reason. If a person is strict on keeping all the minutia of ritual laws, including kosher laws, even if they are explicitly commanded by God, but they're lacking the basic foundation and tools for worshiping the true God, for knowing who he is and who he is not, rather, and lacking the basic foundations of proper decency between themselves, and not having the tools for fomenting and perpetuating a lifestyle of devotion and awe and gratitude before God and kindness toward his fellow man. If you don't already have that, but you're doing all these other rituals, you've really kind of like missed the forest for the trees, right? It's those most foundational things that give any degree of importance to the kosher laws. So what if you're keeping the laws of kashrut, the kosher laws, to the strictest level, but you're doing it for the sake of a created thing? You've turned the holy commandments of God into tools of idolatry in that case. Or you've turned the holy commandments of God into a stick to beat other human beings over the head with, and exalt yourself as some holier than thou person. So that's the reason I don't put Sefer HaKedusha as number one, right? Or number two even. So you asked, like, what are some other things, right? Maybe you could quote the question again one more time.
Let me pull it up here. So they recommended a charity box, a prayer book, a book of Psalms, a book of Torah.
Yeah, charity box is a great idea. And again, this is not explicit halacha from our sages, but
Correct.
there are halachot from our sages about giving charity. So having like a little charity box is a really great idea to keep it in the forefront of your mind.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful idea, and there is a duty to give charity. It's also a great way to educate your kids. You could have each kid have their own little charity box in their bedroom or somewhere in the house, and I mean, you could come up with different creative ideas yourself for how best to educate your children in the act of giving charity. If you put them side by side, it can maybe create some kind of competition of doing a mitzvah. All right. So I don't. That could be for better or worse, but you decide according to the temperament of your own kids what's best. Some other things that maybe are a great idea that you should have in your house, of course, the mezuzah. And the mezuzah is not, the focus is not on the fancy little covering for it, but on what's contained inside of it. For that reason, even though this is not an explicit, it's not a halacha, it's not a requirement, but for that reason, I'm of the opinion that it's praiseworthy to use a type of mezuzah covering that has some sort of indication as to what its contents are. Either a clear mezuzah covering, or one that has like a little window that you can see at least part of what's inside of it, or one that maybe has the words in English on the covering, right? Or in Hebrew. I think that's ideal. It's not a requirement. And more than that, I think a great idea is to have like a eraser board or a notepad. Eraser board's nicer, and I have an affinity for that. On your refrigerator or somewhere in your house that you pass by frequently, and each day, and this is difficult, right? But each day, uh, the husband can write something sweet about their wife, or some kind of a word of encouragement to the family. The wife could do the same thing for the husband. If the husband's doing it for the wife should do it for the husband, right? And vice versa, of course. But don't wait for the other person to act. But I think that's a good thing. We really need to be careful to not view meticulous details of commandments as ends unto themselves. If the keeping of God's commandments, even if it's an explicit commandment of God, if we're doing that and doing it in a way that estranges our spouse or makes our children develop a sort of resentment to the Torah and to the people of Israel, we're doing something terribly wrong. Sometimes you have to be willing to bend a little, meaning sometimes we have to be willing to come to the conclusion by ourselves without our local rabbi or without a Sanhedrin, without a prophet. Sometimes you have to be willing to trust God enough to use the intellect that he blessed you with to say, what are the priorities? Sometimes, and frequently, in my opinion, you're not able to do everything perfectly. So you have to choose what should take priority. If you see that your children are becoming embittered against you or against Torah or your wife or your husband, you need to know where you can bend. Meaning, that's a nice way of saying, you need to know where you can dispensationally, meaning not establishing it as the forever practice or the ideal, but you need to decide and recognize what parts of Torah observance can I be more flexible in? Is there more room for flexibility in? And which parts are less flexible? So you have to choose that part that's more flexible and bend it just a little bit. Meaning, okay, maybe you're not doing it in the most proper or ideal way, but by making that sacrifice, so to speak, it's allowing you to continue to do something that should take even more priority. It's allowing you to do that more prioritized law in the proper way. Sometimes you cannot do two things at once. And if you do one, it's going to automatically mean you're not doing another. So it's best to choose the one that's less severe. And that's usually going to come down to customs. And after customs, it's going to come down to rabbinic law. You always want to give the priority of inflexibility to Torah commandments, right? So be most flexible on the customs. And if that's not sufficient, then with something regarding rabbinic law. Sometimes you have to be flexible with the Torah commandment as well. Not all the Torah commandments are on the same level of severity. And this you can determine by the punishments that are given in the Torah. So if you have no choice but to violate one of two different commandments and you have a choice in the matter, you should choose the one that has the least severe penalty, right? Unless you just want to get a death penalty by the hands of heaven. I mean, I'll leave that up to you. But if you're coerced, that's not going to happen if you feel coerced. But sometimes we're put in a hard place. If you don't give a little in some place in your life, then instead of just violating something on a minimal level, you're going to end up violating something on a much more severe scale. Instead of bending the pen a little bit, it's going to snap, right? That's with regard to your marriage, with regard to your relationships and your kids. So, yeah, for that reason, I think it's important to have something, whether it's a whiteboard or something else, to remind us of the important things, our priorities, right? That's it. I mean, the list could go on forever, but I think those are good beginning steps.
I think that's a great list.
All right. Sha'ela haba'ah. Sha'ela haba'ah. Next question. Sha'ela is a question. Haba'ah.
Does
Next.
here in the room have any questions before we go to the next one on the list?
I have one here on YouTube.
That's the one I was going to go to next.
Well, okay. Because you're going to be asking 100 questions, I'll go ahead and take this one. What does the Talmud mean by the seventh millennial rest? A footnote in Sanhedrin 97a calls it desolation. Just a little one.
I'm not
little
familiar
question.
with the comment about desolation. And sometimes the Hebrew word can have more than one connotation, and that is even true with negative things that sometimes have a positive connotation. But I know that the general consensus is that the seventh millennial rest is generally considered a positive thing. But what I will say with regard to this is that when it comes to the words of our sages, numbers more times than not are symbolic. And that would mean that a seventh millennia doesn't even necessarily mean strictly 1,000 years. It could be just a way of saying an extremely long period of time, right? It could be much, much more than 1,000 years. It may even be symbolic of eternity, hypothetically. The same way that when we say that a, uh, a day to God is like 1,000 years to man, we're not saying, or the intention rather, is not to say that God is subject to time. If it's literally that 1,000 years of man is like one day to God, then that would mean that 2,000 years is 2 days to God, and 3,000 years is 3 days to God. That would mean, if you really think about it, which we should, that would mean that God is subject to time. He's experiencing a passive time. If he's subject to time, that means that there's something he's subject to. That don't sound good. That means that time is greater than God. So what it means that 1,000 years of man is like a day to God, it's just a figure of speech to say that the passage of time to man, even the greatest amount of time to man, is like nothing to God. That is, and to take it literally is actually to take it in the opposite direction of what it's intended to be. So also, there are several places throughout the Bible where it says that God made an everlasting commandment with the people of Israel. And then it may refer back to that again and say, for 1,000 generations. That's not intending to say, but once you reached 1,000 generations of the Jewish people, suddenly the Torah is no longer valid. A thousand is just a common way of expressing the concept of unimaginable length of time, right? And there's no reason to take it literally unless there's some contextual indication that is really meant literally. We also have to think about historically that people did not interact with realities in their consciousness, at least. They didn't interact with concepts that exceeded numbers beyond about 1,000. So they didn't have specific numbers like we do today for a million and a billion and a trillion and a quadrillion. These are later concepts, not only in Hebrew, but also in English. They didn't exist until not that long ago due to scientific advancements. So for that reason, and this is also true for many other words like colors, that because they were much more limited in their ability to do things, if when you don't have any possessions, you don't have a need to have a word for counting exceedingly high when you don't have that much available to you. Likewise with colors, when you don't have that many sources of dyes like we do today, you don't have a need to develop nuanced words for specific types of blue, for example, or green. So those sorts of specifications developed later with language. So that's in short about that. I think it's a mistake to take these kinds of statements very literally. And also, while it's interesting, these sorts of topics, they can very easily become a distraction. And I'd say for most religions in the world, including among the Jewish people, at least among the more traditional of the Jewish people, and certainly with non-Jewish religions, very devout people, they are putting a stumbling block before themselves and others by becoming overly fixated with these kinds of topics. It's not that they're forbidden, but the amount of time we want to give to it should be minimal. Our God commanded us in the Torah to study his Torah, his commandments, day and night, and to constantly review them. The emphasis is constantly on the commandments. There's no commandment for the general population to delve into the mysteries and the speculations of the vague and ambiguous parts of the Torah and of life in general. Right? So while it's not forbidden per se, within limits, that should not be our preoccupation. It can even detract from keeping his commandments. So what should fuel the majority of our study?
Torah.
Right? And by Torah, do you mean speculation about ambiguous and vague prophecies? What do you mean by Torah?
The instructions, I would say Torah and Mishnah Torah.
The clear
what
practical
has been,
application of God's will, how
you know,
to walk in his ways in
The-
this world, in the real world.
I think the question is not surprising, and I would say probably a lot of people think about things like that. And as I read it, I thought this is probably a more dangerous. I was going to use the word danger, not that it's, like you said, it's not forbidden, but it
In
is
excess,
not the
it's forbidden.
safest. It's not the safest way to look at things. It's like, let me go study this out. Or what'd you say? I'm sorry.
In excess, it's forbidden.
Yeah.
Because it leads to a cancellation of actual review of God's commandments.
Well, I would
Which
say
leads,
people tend to look at it and come up with something, and it becomes a dogma,
and then it
it's
becomes a
not.
way of mistreating people.
Right.
It becomes an
Right.
excuse to mistreat people, to X
And
people.
I've received this truth, and you don't have it. You need to see it too. And it's like, no, they need to go
Dangerous.
learn how to do commandments.
Trust me, every cult, every dangerous cult that rises, probably every cult, they're established on some kind of special secret knowledge, special secret revelation that some individual got, and then you're just expected to believe him. It's,
Yeah.
in contrast to the commandments of God, which were given to the entire nation, right? They all stood at Mount Sinai and heard the sound and saw the flashing of lights, right? It's a stark contrast. All right,
All right.
let's make sure we're taking notes on the time. I don't really see
I
it in
think
front of me.
Heather is doing that. And Heather, do you
No,
want to you want to give one out, and then I'll run back into the comments and grab one? Or
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
grabbed this one from Facebook. Rabbi
Okay.
Yosef Haim asks,
Mhm.
is there any circumstance where you would convert someone who had a spouse that would not be converting also?
I would say that there are different forms of conversion. And by conversion, I mean different levels of respectability of the conversion. I don't mean that the conversion itself is fundamentally different between God and that individual on a personal level. But what I mean is that there are different levels of, for lack of a better word, quality of a conversion with regard to its implications for that person and their interaction with the broader Jewish people. That's just a reality. And at the end of the day, the term conversion is not a ideal translation of the word that is usually used to translate, right? The word that's normally used, the Hebrew word that's normally being translated as conversion is the word giur or geruth, all right? And the convert is a ger, if you want to write it down, G-E-R. And this word doesn't mean to change, right? The word conversion in English means to change. Now, yes, there is a change when a person becomes a ger, but it really kind of lessens the impact of the actual meaning of the word. So the root word that's being translated as conversion so often is a word that's related to migration and immigration. Right? The word for immigration / migration in Hebrew is hagira. Hagira. In Arabic is hijra, or in Egyptian Arabic, higra. They're the same root. And this has to do with when a person moves from one domain of legal sovereignty to another domain of sovereignty. So it's in the case of a quote unquote convert, they're entering into the sovereignty of the people of Israel, right? They've taken upon themselves the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, which God has given to the people of Israel to be the executors of his judgments in this world. And by execution, I don't mean capital punishment, but doers of, those who apply it. So as such, you have to, part of a total or complete conversion is not just a personal relationship between yourself and God, but also your relationship with that nation. And that means accepting their national understanding of God's word and how they apply it on a national level. Of course, that on a universal level, that authority on a universal level is limited to the decrees of the Great Sanhedrin. But since we don't have one, in lieu of that, we have de facto national consensus, which may or may not be ideal. It's not infallible, but it's the reality on the ground. National consensus, and then you have local consensus. So you have to deal with that. There are communities where they will be more accepting of someone who converts, who joins the people of Israel when their spouse has not. That kind of conversion is not likely to be accepted by the Orthodox world. But that conversion could be legitimate. It most certainly, I mean, I'm going to say it explicitly, it can be a legitimate conversion, meaning it's a legitimate joining into the people of Israel legally in accordance with historical Jewish law, even though that person is married to someone who is not an Israelite. That does not impact the legitimacy of that conversion. Whether or not this should be done is a different question. Ideally, that should not be done. We've already done 3 minutes. I don't want to give too much time to it, but there are certainly people who discuss this more at length. I would say that if that spouse is opposing your embracing of the Torah, if they're not together with you in it, then you're probably not the best match. They are able to be together with you in that endeavor of doing God's will to your fullest without themselves fully embracing everything. That's hypothetically possible. Whether or not that is permitted is a different question. It's not really a question whether or not it's permitted, but a question of in what way is it forbidden. And there is an understanding within historical classical Judaism that it may not be an absolute Torah prohibition, so long as that spouse is not an idolater, right? And certainly so long as that spouse is not trying to get you to violate the covenant. But you have more issues with this, such as intercourse with someone outside the covenant. That's another question. So there's more that can be said on this. That's really suitable for a whole video into itself. Next question. Sha'elah haba'ah. How about before you go on to the next question, you can say Sha'elah haba'ah. So we learned the word Sha'elah. Sha'elah is a question.
Sha'elah.
Sha'e, like
Sha'elah.
There you go. Sha'elah haba'ah.
All right, somewhat in the same realm, someone asked on Facebook, do you have to convert to Orthodox to be Jewish?
So the word Orthodox is kind of a recent innovation, and outside of European Jewry, it wasn't even really known until fairly recently. So we really need to define what people mean when they say Orthodox, and they don't all mean the same thing. If Orthodox was one specific organized religious organization, like the Roman Catholic Church, it's not just an ethereal concept, it's a specific organization. Like the Southern Baptist Convention, right? It's a specific denomination, the United Methodist Church. If Orthodox was like the Reform Movement of America, which is a specific Jewish organization, then we could give a very clear and indisputable definition. However, there is no one single Orthodox organization that all Orthodox Jews submit to or recognize as ideal or authoritative. Zero. That means, although it's usually put in a list as if to compare it to other Jewish movements, such as the Reform movement, the conservative Jewish movement, it's kind of listed as if it's a denomination. It's really misleading, right? Because unlike those other movements, Orthodox Judaism is not one specific organization. And there are differences between different Orthodox groups. So how are they different? If you look on a Wikipedia article or you talk to the average educated Orthodox Jew, you're likely to get an answer along the lines of, well, an Orthodox Jew is somebody who respects the rabbis. But then the question is, what rabbis? Oh, the Orthodox rabbis. What do we call that? That's called a circular argument. You haven't defined anything. You can't define something with its own word, with that word you're asking about. So that's what you're usually going to get. Well, I'm an Orthodox Jew. What does that mean? It means I follow the rabbis. What rabbis? The Orthodox rabbis. How do I know what rabbi is Orthodox? Well, those are rabbis that follow Orthodox Judaism. Well, what's Orthodox Judaism? Those who follow the rabbis. This is not a definition. If you're a little more, if you get a little more of an accurate answer, then they're probably going to say something like Orthodox Judaism are those communities or those approaches to Judaism which conform to the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch. That's the code of Jewish law by Rabbi Yosef Karo. It was composed in the 16th century. So that's more accurate than the previous common response. However, if that is a truly accurate response, then that would mean that all those rabbis, including Rabbi Yosef Karo himself, were not Orthodox. Because if they existed before him, there was no Shulchan Aruch. So what were they, right? So let me give you a more accurate explanation. Orthodox Judaism, in theory, would be a type of Judaism that is quote unquote right, the right Judaism. So what do you mean by right? You have to look at the etymology of the word Orthodox. That's like the correct way to do something correctly. So what is the definition of correct? Our approach, at least, is that Orthodox Judaism for us, and what it should be for everyone, is a way of living in accordance with God's word, which gives respect and what is the term? Not only gives respect, but also defers authority to interpret God's word with authority. It defers that authority from the individual. So the individual is not saying, I am the ultimate authority for how to interpret God's word. I am not the ultimate determiner of what is right and wrong, but instead it defers that authority, number one, to God, and then number two, to the legal system that God established and authorized, which is the Supreme Court of the people of Israel that would sit in the place that God chose. So for me and for classical Judaism, that is the historical consensus among the Jewish people, that is quote unquote Orthodox Judaism. When you do not have that court, when it's no longer in functioning, then you come up with more difficulties. So God commanded us to keep his commandments according to how they instructed us. But if they're not here, what do? We do like in every other commandment, we do the best we can. So that means that although we don't have that court, we try to get a general understanding of what the scholars of the people of Israel who respect the final generations of the actual court, who respect their words and try to conform to their words as much as possible. We try to get a consensus for how they understand new scenarios and how we should keep God's commandments in new circumstances. But do they have the same authority as the Great Sanhedrin, as the Supreme Court of ancient Israel? No, they don't have the same authority. But you have to choose some halachic system or some sort of tradition of understanding the words of our sages to go by, right? And that doesn't have to be a specific person or a specific book. It could be one or the other, or it could be a combination of both. You don't have to go according to one rabbi for all areas of the Torah commandments, but you could. That would be extra difficult because most rabbis are not masters of the entirety of the Torah. And even if they are, they haven't written books, exhaustive books for every area of Torah. So it's permissible to find for yourself a scholar who you go by for the laws of prayer and a different one for the laws of Shechita. But if they all hold to the everlasting nature of God's covenant with Israel, consisting of the 613 commandments, then although there's going to be some variation among them, there's going to be a general consensus for the basic structure of a Torah lifestyle, right? And so that means that although perhaps you specifically don't go specifically by the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yosef Karo, but you're going to still be doing something more or less along the lines of what you find in the Shulchan Aruch. So I personally, I don't strictly go by the Shulchan Aruch. I go more or less by the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, Maimonides. Why? That's a whole other topic. But the Mishneh Torah of Maimonides is, let's say, 95% the same as what you're going to find in the Shulchan Aruch, right? And most people, if not all, if we're going to be frank, most people who say they go by Shulchan Aruch don't go by Shulchan Aruch on a wide range of different topics. Right? It's more like a way of referring to the general framework of a Torah lifestyle, but there's a lot of flexibility in how you apply those laws in different scenarios, and that's why you need a rabbi. Ideally, more is better, right? Most people talk about having one rabbi, but the more you have, the better, so you can get a greater consensus. You can see, if they have different opinions, then you can choose to go by the majority of those that you asked, for example. That's getting you closer to the ideal that God commanded, that we heed the sages on the Temple Mount. Right? So that's Orthodox Judaism.
You mentioned you lean toward Mishneh Torah rather than Shulchan Aruch.
Of Rambam, of Maimonides, yeah.
And Penene Halacha?
Penine Halacha.
Where would that fit in?
That's going to be much more influenced by Ashkenazi tradition than by the Mishneh Torah. But again, with all of these, if you're drawing from classical Jewish sources, yeah, there's going to be some differences, but the general system is going to be the same. They're going to be debating and having differences over details.
And I guess it probably brings it a little more current day because for their community, you'll see practical, more timely things because it was written more recently.
But they should know that no single book written within the last 200 years, 800 years, or even 1,000 years is an absolute, unquestionable, infallible authority over all of Israel. So if there's something in Pineinei Halacha or any other modern book that it just it's not working for your family or it's destroying your marriage, don't think that it's this way or the highway. There are other opinions and you should go try to find them, right? We shouldn't be like, oh, I'm only going to go by the opinions that are the easiest for me. But there's more than one educated opinion that may be much more realistic for you and your family or your situation. Right? And there's certainly more than just that one book that you mentioned.
If you were moving into a community and that was the way that they pretty much handled themselves, it certainly wouldn't hurt to familiarize with yourself.
Absolutely, it's smart, if not a duty, to become familiar with it. That doesn't mean that you are required by God to live according to every detail in that book in your private life or when you're outside of the synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
But at least to know how to be respectful in the synagogue or when you're at their houses, for sure. And there are rabbis who have made similar type books for how to apply historical Jewish law to modern new scenarios in the modern world. There are plenty of other books like that come from a perspective more in line with the Mishneh Torah than that book that you referred to. Unfortunately, though, those books are less available in English. Most of what you're going to find in English is going to be more in line with the Ashkenazi tradition because the majority of English-speaking Jews are Ashkenazi, right? And that's why you need the Mishnah walk to broaden your horizons.
We touched on conversion a little bit, Gior, and so there's another question related. So I figured I kind of didn't want to lead off with this, but we'll go ahead and hit it anyway.
After this, let's do something of a very different nature
Yes.
so people won't get bored.
Sure,
Right? And
sure.
we can come back maybe on another episode or go
Yeah.
ahead.
So final one on this topic is someone asks, how do I convert to Judaism?
The simple, that simple question. Okay. Normally, when a person says that, I think what they mean is they want to become a full member of the people of Israel, to join the Jewish people, to be able to marry with them. The way you do that simply is that you acknowledge, you recognize the supreme authority of the creator of the universe. You recognize that he is distinct, immeasurably distinct from any created thing. So that means that you're no longer worshiping anything else. You recognize that that supreme authority, his will, his authoritative will for all generations of humanity, is only within the Torah. The 5 books of Moses, it's contained within the Torah. And you recognize that he gave the only supreme legislative and judicial authority for how to implement those commandments and enforce those commandments. He gave that authority only to the Supreme Court of the people of Israel. If you have accepted this upon yourself, his oneness, his singularity, that he's incomparable, there's no image or form that contains him or to which he compares. You've accepted that, and you've fully embraced his will, even if you don't know all the details of it. But as a total package, you embrace it, just like the people of Israel did at Mount Sinai. Before hearing all the commandments, they said, Na'aseh wa nishma. We shall do it and we shall hear it. Meaning that their willingness to do came before their having learned of the details. This is what we call receiving upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. All right, that means to fully embrace his lordship over you, over your life, with all your heart. That's what that means. It doesn't mean you do everything perfectly. It means that you acknowledge and submit to his authority, that there's no authority greater or equal to his, right? So if you have done that, then there's no other option for you than to join his people in a formal way if you are able to. That means you need to find ideally, if you are able to find 3 qualified Jews who can witness your conversion. That means that essentially, between yourself and God, you have sort of already joined the people of Israel, because you've made their God and you've made the legal authority over the people of Israel, the Great Sanhedrin, your legal authority. You've already put yourself under that authority, but it doesn't have practical relevance until you do it in front of representatives of the nation, right? So until you do it in front of representatives of the nation, it's not a legal reality. It's kind of like a spiritual reality. But that was the first step, right? That's the covenant between you and God. But the covenant between God and his people is also with his people. So now you need to do the second part. It's entering into the covenant with his people, joining his people. You do that between 3 in the presence of 3 regular Torah observant Jews. Ideally, they would be Torah scholars, right? They don't have to formally be a congregational rabbi. Ideally, they'd be Torah scholars, but any 3 Jews who acknowledge the singularity of God, accept the oneness of God, don't worship anything other than him, and who themselves embrace the full covenant of Torah. If that's who they are, they're 13 years or older and they are males, they should be males because the Torah recognizes the difference between males and females. Then you have them confirm that you are already circumcised, and if you're not, then you get circumcised and they need to confirm that. If you are already circumcised and they're not the ones doing it to you, then they will make a symbolic drawing of blood, which is very minimal. It's like a prick on the tip of your finger. And that's only for males. Women don't have to do anything like that, right? And once you've done that and you've accepted the commandments in their presence, meaning you've let them know that you've embraced the commandments, Then you immerse fully in front of them in a qualified body of water. That's what you need them for, to determine whether or not the body of water is acceptable. And after the fact, meaning generally speaking, any collected pool of water that is deep enough for your body to be submerged in is acceptable. Doesn't mean it's ideal, but it would be acceptable by the avad. Unless it's like absolutely disgusting, you don't do that because you got to say a blessing, right? But if you immersed in their presence, then you've joined the people of Israel, right? There's an ideal way of doing this, and then there's just dealing with the reality on the ground. The fact of the matter is that the Jewish people are not prepared practically to take in the massive quantity of people who are wanting to join them and who essentially have already joined them, but just haven't done it in a formal way. They're not equipped. So let me tell you something that you can do to get as close to the ideal as possible, right? Don't tell anyone I told you this. If you are in the presence of Torah observant Jews and you declare that you do this act of immersing yourself fully for the sake of accepting the commandments, and then you immerse yourself in their presence, then you come out of the water, you are legally a part of the people of Israel. How can you do this without doing it in an organized fashion? Well, there's something called kosher beaches, which are full of Torah observant Jews. I'll let you go and do the investigation and figure out the rest yourself. I think you can put connect the dots. All right. Now, for women, that's not so simple because we don't want a woman immersing, immodestly in front of a bunch of Torah observant men. But once you have 3 men in your community who've done that, then you can oversee the conversion, quote unquote, the transition of legal status of the women in your community as well. But it's proper to do this under the guidance of a Torah scholar, right? That's in short, that's a short introduction. Where there's a will, there's a way, and there's certainly a way. Sha'elah haba'ah. Sha'elah haba'ah. Next question.
It looks like Dan and Martina have a question.
All right. B'chavod, go right ahead.
It came up yesterday in shul, to Bishvat, the celebration of the New Year's of the trees. We know that part, and it's in the calendar, but can you give us a little bit more information about it?
There's not a lot to do on Tu B'Shvat nowadays. Almost everything associated with it is a matter of custom. So I'd rather not get too into it. The concept is not simply a matter of custom, but what we would do nowadays is, I can't think of a single thing off the top of my head that is an actual obligation. But if we had a Gris Nadrin, or if you're growing trees yourself, then it has trees for fruit, that is, then it has practical implications.
Perhaps explain what it is.
Yeah. So you're not supposed to eat fruit from a tree until 3 years have passed. And
trees in the land.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes there's dispute about these details. I don't know if there's a dispute about that specifically. There is a dispute in a related sort of way with regard to what we call new and old grain eating bread. So some people forbid eating new grain outside the land of Israel, and then other people say that's only grains grown in the land of Israel. So I don't know if that's the case here or not, and I don't want to state one way or the other. But it's not a big deal if you're growing trees to look into that. But that's the basic idea of when it's permitted to eat from fruit grown from a tree. Right? Sha'elah haba'ah. Next question. And when you give the next question, proceed it with Sha'elah haba'ah. So we can learn the word Sha'elah.
Sha'elah haba'ah.
Beautiful.
Oh, so this question comes from Maria on Facebook. What if all that you believe is not true? Would that change your views?
Oh, of course it would change my view. Maybe a better question, at least for someone as myself, who it would change my views, maybe then the better question is, would it change my lifestyle, right? I don't think it would change my way of life. I guess that would depend on if I found out that everything I believed was a lie. I guess it would depend on what I found out is true. If what I found out is true is that God's will is actually expressed in some other holy code, and I see that it increases goodness in the world, then I would probably change and conform to that other code of laws. If that truth is that there is no God, then I would probably continue to live as if there is a God. And for me, there would still be a God, even if perhaps that God is not everything that I assumed him to be. But for me, there would still be a God, because what you mean by God, it could also be understood in the sense of that which you value supremely, what you place highest value in. So for me, even if there were no, God forbid, if there were no true God, true within himself, existing within himself, regardless of our opinions, even if that did not exist, God forbid, my highest value would still be the principles of justice, of fairness, and of goodness. And so I would still strive to live a lifestyle that spreads that in the world as much as I can, and adds meaning to my life and to other people's lives. But as a general pointer for people, the best determiner for truth that I can give in summary is consistency, right? And I would give two aspects to that: internal consistency and external consistency. Is the concept that you're asking about consistent within itself, within its own principles that it teaches and conveys? Is it consistent with itself, or are there contradictions? And even if it's consistent with itself, is it consistent with observable reality? If there are inconsistencies in either of these two aspects, then there's some element of falsehood. Because we're humans, there's always going to be some degree of misunderstanding or some questionable aspect. That doesn't necessarily invalidate the the broad system of the reality that you understand. But it may indicate that there's some shortcoming of understanding or comprehension on our part. So look for consistency and keep your eye out for inconsistency. When you see inconsistency, then put a magnifying glass on it and refine it to the best of your ability. But don't drive yourself crazy as far as like concern for burning in hell because you aren't sure about some particular detail. I don't know how great and compassionate a God would be if that God is going to condemn someone to everlasting torment because despite his striving to serve the true God with all his ability, with all his sincerity, yet he has some inaccuracy in his understanding of some point, despite all his efforts, that now God's going to send him to hell forever. For me, that's not the true God. You know, maybe that person knows there's a true God, but their perception of that God is faulty in my mind. If they think that that is a God of justice and mercy, I don't think so. I think that the God of justice and mercy is one who wants what's best for us, wants us to know the truth, but is compassionate toward us when, despite our greatest efforts, we still have some shortcoming, right? That for me is the God of truth, the God of mercy, the God of reason. And that's the God I serve. Ishtabach Shemo. Sha'elah haba'ah.
Sha'elah haba'ah. Honey on Facebook asks, do Jews have a prayer direction?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Our direction of prayer is to God. It's true, though. It's to God. I know they're asking about physically, but first and foremost, it's to the Creator. That means that we're not directing our prayers conceptually to any location, any tangible or physical location. Our prayers go to the absolute Creator who transcends the concepts of space and time. They don't apply to him. He's not subject to them. He is the point of reference for all existing things. Okay? After we understand that, if we don't understand that, then everything else that follows is irrelevant. After we understand that, then for the sake of national unity and as a testimony to the oneness of the Creator, we face toward the place which the Lord chose, the place that he chose, which according to the tradition of Israel, the Jewish people, is Jerusalem. And if you're in Jerusalem, it is the Temple Mount. And if you're on the Temple Mount, then it is the direction of the Holy of Holies. But it is critical that one understand that our prayers are not to be directed to Jerusalem or to the temple or to the Holy of Holies. We don't direct, when we close our eyes and we pray, we're not crying out to Jerusalem. We're not crying out to the temple or to anything or any power that's contained literally in the temple. That would be a great error. And it's possibly one of the reasons why the temple was destroyed, just like the bronze serpent was destroyed once it was being worshipped, even though God himself commanded it to be built as an inspiration to repentance. Sometimes people turn into idols what God commands. So assuming that we're not worshiping the temple, assuming we haven't made the temple an intermediary between ourselves and God, then you face in the direction of the temple, but you do not direct your prayers to it. You face in the direction of the temple to inspire the people around us to what the temple symbolizes, right? It symbolizes the one God who's consistent in his ways and whose word goes out to the world from that place through the instruction and guidance of the great court of Israel, right? That's why it states in the prophets, for out of Zion shall go forth the Torah, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Why? Isn't the Bible in every hotel room? Well, then it's going out from everywhere. But the way in which we actually apply it isn't coming out from random hotel rooms. It comes out from the temple that God commanded us to build, in which his representatives as a legislative and judicial body guide the nation and all who turn to him, right? So yes, Jerusalem is the true Qibla. It is the true direction of prayer. If you don't know what direction that is when you are going to pray, then you can face any direction because God is not bound by any direction, right? It doesn't impact the acceptability of your prayer. Sha'elah haba'a.
Sha'elah haba'a. Christina on Facebook asks, if you're not supposed to eat milk with meat, why did Abraham serve calf meat and curds, dairy for Adonai and his men?
Oh, beautiful. Perhaps the simplest answer is because it had not yet become forbidden. That will frustrate some people in the traditional Jewish community because there is a idea, mostly in the quote unquote ultra-Orthodox world, the Haredi world, the black hat world. There's this idea that the patriarchs of Israel kept all of the Torah. Like there was no difference, that they kept all the Torah. But if people would actually read the weekly Torah portion as we're supposed to, they would know how ridiculous that is. The Torah forbids marrying sisters. Jacob married sisters. Okay, he was deceived. Well, once he found out, that means he should have divorced them. The Torah forbids worshiping God by means of libations over a monument or by building a pillar around which people gather for religious purposes. The Torah forbade that, even if you're not doing idolatry there. Yet the patriarchs worshipped God by erecting pillars. The Torah forbids sacrificing outside the place that the Lord would choose. Yet not only the patriarchs, but even the generation of Moses were making offerings all over the place. So this idea that the patriarchs were keeping the Torah, the entire Torah, as it is according to the covenant of the Torah, this idea is, to say it frankly, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. When our sages said that the patriarchs kept all of the Torah, what they stated was true. They did keep all of the Torah, but they did not keep all of the Torah as it is incarnate, so to speak, incarnate in the ritual commandments. Rather, they kept all of the Torah in the sense that they kept the most basic and fundamental principles around which the Torah is given structure later at Mount Sinai, right? So they kept the spirit of the Torah, so to speak, but they did not keep all the details of the Torah. You could say that Abraham served them dairy, and then after they had the dairy, they had meat. Maybe that's true, but we really shouldn't waste our time with such speculation. And even if it is true that he separated between dairy and milk, between dairy and meat in the book of Genesis, even if that were true, it still would not mean that they kept all of the Torah and all its details as we do now post Mount Sinai. All right? Sha'elah haba'ah. Next question. So they certainly, the patriarchs certainly kept Torah in the most fundamental sense, as in the spirit of the Torah, monotheism, ethical monotheism, treating people decently, even if they had shortcomings. That was the Torah that they guarded and embraced.
So Juan on Facebook asks,
Sha'elah
Sha'elah
haba'ah.
haba'ah. Juan on Facebook asks, why do the majority of Jews follow the Shulchan Aruch if it contains aspects that go against what was established as national law?
That's a great question. Well, I'm sure people would dispute whether that's the case, but I think that what he is saying has some truth to it. Number one, let's say that there are a number of practices that are common in the Orthodox world today that do contradict what was established as national Jewish law for a millennia until we entered modern times. More than a millennium, more than a millennium, or nearly millennia. A few random examples are unmarried women covering their hair. Another example would be praying in a reverential way, actually bowing down upon one's knees and prostrating before God. And I'm not only saying that these were practices in biblical times, these are clearly practices that the sages of Israel established in the Talmudic literature. And even in post-Talmudic literature, you find it. Yet these are neglected today. But when it comes to the Shulchan Aruch itself, the degree to which it perhaps contradicts earlier national law is more debatable than contradictions with modern practice, right? There was never a time that the practical application of the Torah was 100% monolithic in all its details. There was always some degree of diversity of understanding. Even when we had the Great Sanhedrin, and they would issue decrees, they would issue interpretations of the Torah and rabbinic legislation. Even during that time period, different communities would understand their instruction in different ways, and for that reason, different communities would develop their own customs. But they would be tolerant of different customs. They would not say, you're a heretic and we cannot intermarry with you because you have a different understanding of the rulings of the Sanhedrin. That was not the case. And that's kind of become the case over the years, especially in the ultra-Orthodox world. And that's a problem. Every community has what to work on. So the Shulchan Aruch. Why? Well, even why might, let's say hypothetically, it contradicts previously existing national law, just for argument's sake. It can be then in certain new scenarios, in order to preserve a greater observance of the Torah in general, there's a need to augment or modify some rabbinic law, even if it's indisputably coming from the Great Sanhedrin. It is a time to act for the sake of the eternal because they are loosening your Torah. A time to act by doing what? It means that there's a time to act and make some kind of noticeable, significant change because the seams that hold together the fabric of a Torah society are weakening. They're coming apart. So someone needs to step up and make a change. Sometimes that means we need to make a change that changes something that was established for generations. We cannot do that with regard to Torah commandments. You cannot say for all generations, we're not going to do this Torah commandment anymore because they're violating another Torah commandment. But you can do it in a dispensational sense. And you can certainly do it with rabbinic law, and all the more so you can do it with customs. But this is not something that really the average Joe should be doing if they have access to scholars. It really is a responsibility that should be deferred to scholars. So it can be that you have a legitimate code of Jewish law that temporarily sets aside some rabbinic law for the greater good, but it shouldn't be arbitrary, and that's left up to the discretion of the posek, of the legal authority. And we also need to state before moving on to the next question that any code of Jewish law, whether the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam or of Shulchan Aruch, whatever the case be, no code of Jewish law is infallible and inerrant and an absolute authority for all generation. And those who create those codes of Jewish law did not intend for them to be understood in such an absolutist way. All codes of Jewish law inherently defer to the great Sanhedrin. That means once we have a reestablished functioning court of the people of Israel, that court will have absolute authority to modify anything that's in the Shulchan Aruch or Mishneh Torah or anything else like that, within the limits and peer view of the general principles of halakha, meaning of how to apply God's commandments and how to apply the rulings of the greatest sages, those who are greater than them who came before them. Right? So it's not an absolutist or monolithic. It's not supposed to be understood that way anyway. Some people do understand it that way, but that's their own shortcoming. As times change and as information becomes more available to people regarding science, regarding biology, regarding nature, sometimes the halachot have to adjust because we learned that reality wasn't what we thought it was previously. Or maybe it was something different previously, and nature, or at least as nature is manifesting before us, is changing, right? And you could take either perspective, but they would have the same practical implication. Sometimes you do need, I'll give you a simple example. Everybody knows that in the book of Genesis, you have Adam and Eve, right? God created Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve. But our sages, after thousands of years of Jewish tradition already in the Talmud, our sages knew at that time that there are physiological anomalies. There are some people who are born with apparently no genitalia, to be frank. And then there are some people who are born with some kind of weird, I'm not trying to offend anybody here, but maybe I shouldn't have said weird, but it's weird. Okay? There are other people who are born with
unusual,
unusual or atypical sexual development, so that it may not be clear whether they are male or female. And it's sufficient already, even if it looks predominantly female, but there's something unusual there that's already sufficient, according to the words of our sages, that this is something different, right? It's a fact, whether we like it or not, that the Torah doesn't explicitly talk about this topic, but it's a reality. If we're keeping God's word in the realm of abstract spirituality, and it's not a actual real life lived system and lived community and nation, then okay, maybe you can be satisfied with the Holy Spirit is going to tell me what to do in that situation. But different people hear the Holy Spirit in different ways, apparently. And when you're an actual functioning nation, you need to know authoritatively, meaning within the context of courts, what are you supposed to do? What if a man marries a androgynos, that's the term that the sages use. If a man marries an androgynos, is he liable for the death penalty? Is only he liable for the death penalty, but the androgynos is exempt? Or what if a woman marries the androgynos, right? So I'm not going to get into all the details, but believe it or not, the sages of Israel already 2,000 years ago were talking about these things. And they did not say, oh, we're just going to ignore it because the Torah doesn't mention it. No, they dealt with it as the reality was presented to them. They dealt with it the best they could according to the extent of their knowledge, right? And that's just an extreme example, but it's true for many different things, right? How do you keep Shabbat when you're orbiting around the Earth in the International Space Station? You got to have some practical application of the law, unless you want people just randomly doing things, right? So there are certainly questions of how to keep Torah that our sages in the past did not deal with, never even occurred to them. And there are things that will arise in the future that would never occur to us today, right? So that's why we need scholars who have good character, not just mental capability to remember things and apply things, but also good character of humility and of compassion, right? You really don't want judges of Israel who are hot-headed and quick to put the heaviest burden on the people. But you also want them to be objective and rational, right? More so than the general populace. All right, Sha'elah haba'ah. Next question.
There's kind of two things that are true there. You have the people who can apply things that have never been seen before, never been addressed, but you also have who's the best person to ask? Moses. After him, who's the best person to ask? The 70. And so on and so forth. As those groups, first hand and second hand, then third hand. And then today we get into this, well, I'll ask some people today, what should I do? But if it has been answered as early as possible, that's where you should go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that brings up a very, very important point. And I think that this is one of the clear boundaries between classical Torah observance, classical Torah Judaism, aka Orthodox Judaism, as a concept, not as a specific organization. And that is there will always be a need for adjustment and for change, for evolution, so to speak, within a community as time changes. But are we changing things that our sages ruled upon, which are the same today as they were back then? Or are we changing things that they never dealt with, didn't know about, right? It could also be that maybe they spoke about something specifically, but some detail was not discussed among them. They didn't know about some detail, so then maybe there's room for review. But if it's something that it's apparent that there's no difference, right? Then if you come along and say, well, I'm just going to do something, I'm completely going to throw their words out the window, because the popular thing nowadays in non-Jewish society is that we don't want to hurt people's feelings. So because someone might be offended if they see what our sages said, so then I'm just going to toss it out the window, or act like the instruction of our sages are no less legitimate than pop cultural opinion. So that's kind of where you start to have a line drawn between classical Torah Judaism and the Reform movement, for example. And there are good people in the Reform movement. Many people, that's the only option they have in their communities. But I'm not referring to individuals who go to the Reform temples, Reform Jewish temples. I'm referring to the Reform movement as a movement. That's one of the big differences between it and classical Torah Judaism. It's one thing to update things by necessity because something actually changed. It's another thing to make changes even when they're unnecessary, and even more of an issue to say that the instruction of our sages is just as legitimate, or rather no more legitimate than pop cultural opinion, right? That's contrary to the Torah of Israel. That already goes outside the definition, the classical definition of what it means to be a Jew, right? And you might be genetically related to Jewish families, all right, and have non-traditional views that that contradict Jewish tradition despite there being no real change in human nature or the reality around us. So you might be Jewish in an ancestral sense or an ethnic sense, but that doesn't mean that what you're doing is Jewish in the sense that it's representative of classical heritage of the Jewish people, right? It's just like an American may be legally an American, but if he's supporting certain political ideologies that fly in the face of historical American values of liberty, of freedom of religion, free speech, then okay, you might be legally an American citizen. You might have American ancestry, but that doesn't mean that you're representing American heritage. Same thing here, no different, no different. Just because you come from a Jewish family doesn't mean that just anything that you do can be called legitimate Jewishness or Judaism, right? And a lot of people have that sort of mentality that if a Jew does it, then it's Jewish. If that's the definition of Jewish, then Judaism has no meaning, right? When you strip away all definition, then anything that's stripped of all definition, i.e. limits, definition means limit. When you've removed all limits, then that thing becomes meaningless, becomes definitionless, right? So that's that. You have to have a limit. And the limits of Torah Judaism, the limits of legitimate Judaism are the limits of the covenant between God and Israel. That's the 613 commandments that include heeding the sages of Israel. In the place that the Lord would choose. Sha'elah haba'ah. Next question. Sha'elah haba'ah. Go ahead. You guys say it.
Sha'elah haba'ah.
Kol hakavod.
So Anya on Facebook asks, what are the nuances about the permission of eating foods containing gelatin? Does this permission also apply to non-kosher animals?
Excellent question. It's a question of dispute among poskim, even among Orthodox poskim. And that's because they didn't really have this issue historically. People usually, what they would eat would be mostly whole foods. And that's not because of health concerns, but that was just the reality. Everybody ate whole foods. So if you're eating a big bowl of gelatinized horse hooves, that means you were really intending to eat a big bowl of gelatinized horse hooves. But nowadays, it's common in the food industry, the processed food industry specifically, that many ingredients are added not as the actual food that the person's eating, but rather to extend shelf life or to affect the appearance of the food, but not the taste of the food. And these additives, regardless of what they're coming from, are not noticeable to the average person when they eat them, other than they're not noticeable on the palate, rather, in taste. And also, many of these additives, regardless of what they're derived from, have been isolated from the source that they're derived from, isolated to such an extent that they are broken down to their basic molecular structures, which are then different, meaning are indistinguishable from how they may derive from other objects as well. And for that reason, you have a real question as to whether that makes them forbidden. So if you want to err on the side of stringency, then any kind of gelatin, let's say it comes from a non-kosher animal, and that would include kosher species that are not slaughtered properly, that would mean that you're not allowed to eat them. However, our sages, zichronam livracha, their memory be for a blessing, our sages established a principle of batel b'shishim, that if something which is unkosher is 1/60th or less of the ingredients in an object and a food, and you did not add it into that food intentionally, then you're permitted to eat from it. And this is on the condition that you can't taste it. If it's detectable by taste, then it's really irrelevant what is technically the percentage of the food it constitutes, right? But I don't know if there's any. It would have to be a pretty special substance to override the pervasive taste, even if it's 1/60th or less, and still be like a noticeable taste. You'd have to have an exceptional sense of taste. So for this reason, there are poskim who permit even gelatin deriving from non-kosher animals, because it's been isolated to such a degree on a molecular level that it's molecularly no different from gelatin that may be derived from a kosher animal. It's indistinguishable. This is no different from like an animal breaking down, degenerating, what do you call it? Decomposing in nature, and then those molecular elements being reabsorbed into plants, and then you're eating the plants, right? Once you've broken it down to the molecular level, is it really the same thing? I mean, how do our sages relate to leather bags, for example? Do they convey impurity or not? Well, they generally held that once you've transformed it into a different entity, it no longer has the status of the unkosher animal, the impure animal that it was originally. And that's even if you can see that it's like leather. All the more so, one could say, with regard to breaking something down to the molecular level, such as gelatin.
When you say that, you're referring to it already being in a product rather than going and say to the store and buying a
Oh,
jar
yes. Very good.
of
Very good
horse
question.
hoof gelatin.
Correct,
You know,
correct.
you could not add that even a
Yes.
1/60th amount to your thing. It's
Can't
just
do it intentionally.
right.
You can do it for medical reasons, for health reasons, not just gelatin, but any sort of thing, because it doesn't have the status of food, right? And in the Haredi world, they are still strict even with that. But if you're doing it like a supplement, then there's no prohibition even there. You're eating it like medicine. You're not eating it as food. But if you're deriving enjoyment from it, if there's something about it that you really enjoy, it needs to be kosher. I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Went backwards. I saw a post on Facebook, someone who had a foot injury and they have to get an operation. They found, or they discovered that it was going to be parts from a pig or a cadaver to heal her foot. And she was, what do I do? It's all over. Obviously, it's not all over.
No.
And maybe you could just explain
Yeah,
that.
the prohibition is on eating. It's not on something external to yourself.
So
And
don't eat your
even
foot, you're fine.
and even with regard to eating, if it's unkosher, but it's necessary for your health, it's permitted. And the entire Jewish world recognizes that, including Haredim, the
Sure.
ultra-Orthodox, recognize that. If it's necessary for your health, you should do it. I mean, if you don't have any other options. If you're faced with either I'm going to have an open wound or I have to put pigskin on it, because that's the only option doctors are giving me, you are sinning by not accepting it. If you don't have anything else to eat but pigs, and you're letting your children starve rather than feed them pig, you are sinning by not eating pig.
And if they
When-
die, you've committed murder.
Yeah. When the Torah prohibits eating unkosher food, it's speaking in the general circumstance of humanity. It's not talking about in a life or death situation. And we have to keep in mind that this is the truth for all the commandments in general, except for 3, right? All the commandments in general are given for your general life. They're not given for when you're in a state of war, fighting for your life. They're not given for when, God forbid, there are bandits who have weapons and they're threatening your wife and children. In all these cases, you can violate, and you should violate, all the commandments that you need to in order to preserve life. Who are you to decide that not eating pig is more important than the commandment to love your children, to love your spouse, and to keep untold numbers more commandments tomorrow? So you're going to sacrifice all those other commandments, keeping all those other commandments, and you're going to sacrifice the life of your children and your commandment to be compassionate to your children. You're going to sacrifice all of that so that you won't eat pig. Who are you? You turned the commandment to not eat pig into an end unto itself. You're now worshiping the pig, Chas v'shalom.
That's funny. Sha'ala'a ha'aba.
Haba'a.
Haba'a. Okay.
Next question. Sha'ala haba'a.
Yeah. Somewhat related too, and I thought of it and wrote it down. About tallow. There's a probability that we're going to see more of that as we get away from seed oils and possibly in this look at how to be healthier and not have the obesity that we see because of some changes many years ago. But there's the question of, okay, well, I can't eat my fries if they're fried in tallow because that belongs to Hashem, and it's possible that fat would be from the forbidden fats. I was wondering if, and I would think that there would be kosher tallow available. I was wondering if you could touch on that. Plus, other species that fat isn't forbidden. I wonder if you could touch on that.
Correct. And tallow refers to the fat of the rear end. Yes.
I think it's a process of making, and I may be wrong, making something to cook in and out of fats. Whether or not it's from the rear end, I know there's a lot of fat on the brisket of a beef, which is up front. That would be probably where I would pull it if I was going to use it myself. If I was going to render it down to an oil for cooking, I would take it from the front of the animal, but I'm not really sure how that would be done.
All right. So I would prefer to have reviewed these laws before speaking on this, but from my memory, it's not always the best, you guys. But from my memory, there's no prohibition on like the fat from the rear end, right? I think there's some customs, especially among Ashkenazim, they avoid eating from anything back there because of their concern for Gid HaNasheh, the sciatic nerve.
Mm-hmm.
But the Middle Eastern Jews, non-Ashkenazi Jews, aren't strict on, well, they are. It's not that they're not strict, but that they feel confident in their understanding of identifying the sciatic nerve. So they're not concerned about that. But the forbidden fat that we are concerned about with consumption is not restricted it doesn't forbid fat of the behind or like the tail, but it does forbid the fat of the internal organs, right? Helev. So that you do need to be concerned about. But external fats are not an issue as far as I recall. Right? But I would prefer that we would read through that. The person could read through the halachot regarding that. Don't ever imagine that any individual rabbi is an authority in and of himself. He can make mistakes. No rabbi remembers everything, no matter how great you might esteem them. And the responsibility remains upon you as an individual also to study for yourself. So consider your rabbis to be guides, but don't consider them to be your vicarious atonement, who, if you make a mistake, it's on them instead of on you, right? It's a shared responsibility. But yeah, I'm not even sure if I thought tallow referred to fat of like the hind side, but if not, then I don't even know exactly what tallow is, so I can't be talking about it. I've heard the word.
I Googled it. It just says that it's rendered beef fat.
Oh, so it's even not coming from any specific location. Oh, that's extremely broad.
Yeah,
There are certainly then, as Victor correctly pointed out, there's certainly sources of fat on animals that are kosher. You just need to know where it can be taken from and where it shouldn't be. And also, because people usually use it for flavor, this is not just for some medical supplement, but people usually enjoy it. Then for that reason, you need to be getting it from a kosher source for sure.
Yeah, and I would imagine that a kosher butcher, if that's what they do for a living, knows which fats are the right ones because they're pulling it out every minute.
If they don't know, they shouldn't.
They're not
they
a
shouldn't be
kosher
doing
butcher.
it.
Yeah, so they might be able to supply.
You can have somebody who is acceptable for slaughtering, but not for taking apart, dismembering the internal organs and all that. That can be two different people. That's a different matter. But usually they're the same person. Generally, if it's a certified shohet, they know both. And they should, and we should also.
So if you wanted to switch to an oil based on that, I would say find a butcher
Yeah,
that's
it's not a question
kosher
of
and see if you
whether
can
you
get it.
could. You certainly can.
Yeah.
It is certainly possible to have kosher tallow. That means, though, that it's coming from the kosher fats of the animal and not from the unkosher fats.
And it was killed
and that does,
correctly.
oh, of course,
Yeah.
and you don't have the concern for forbidden fats, helev, with wild species such as deer, right, or buffalo.
Yep.
Haba, sha'Allah haba'a, sha'Allah haba'a. Next question.
Sha'Allah haba'a. So Misty on Facebook, how can the Dome of the Rock be removed quickly?
So I guess the key question here is quickly. Why'd you do this to me?
Just to keep it a little spicy.
Okay, well, you tell me, what is the quickest way to get rid of a building? Why don't we ask the people who protest the most of us building it? How did you quickly get rid of the Twin Towers on 9/11? How did you quickly get rid of Jewish lives on buses in Israel? How do you quickly get rid of Jews, when you murder them? Well, it usually involves explosives, whether from a gun or a bomb. So I'm not saying that this is what we should do, but I know that those who would be most offended by the thought of getting rid of that building, I know that they are experts in bombs, so they shouldn't be offended with bombs. And also, this is really who we're answering. We're answering not ourselves because we know how to do it. Yeah, I'm not saying, to be clear, somebody commented they could not use explosives because things could get damaged. I'm not saying that you should bomb the place, but if we want to say how to most quickly get rid of it, then that's what we could do. However, the people who are really answering regarding this, we're not talking to a Torah observant Jewish person, because a Torah observant Jewish person knows that God's commandments come first, right? Not the sentiments of people who are going to hate us no matter what we do, because we exist, right? The only Jew that the people who would be offended by us rebuilding the temple, the only Jew that those people are happy with are Jews who redefine themselves in their image, Jews who will redefine their Jewishness in the image of a Jew who denies every aspect of what it means to be a Jew that offends the enemy. And that means not being a Jew. For a Muslim, that means being a Jew who nullifies a massive percentage of God's commandments, right? For the anti-Semitic Christian, to be clear, not all Christians, but for the Christian who worships a Christ that is the opposite of what a true Christ would be, for the Christian who worships a Christ who is not faithful to God's everlasting commandment and was not sent because God is going to fulfill his promises to Israel, but rather for the Christian who worships a Christ who is anti what a Christ would be, connect the words antichrist. For that kind of a person, a acceptable Jew who's not worthy of being killed is only the kind of Jew who abandons Jewishness, right? So we should not give a flip about these people. But we do need to do what we can to increase knowledge in the world. And it's really not difficult nowadays in the modern era to inform uneducated Christians how contrary their anti-Jewish Christianity is to what a true Christ would teach. And in fact, how contrary to even Jesus himself, regardless of whether he was a Messiah. It is not difficult to teach Christians how contrary to what Jesus taught their anti-Jewish sentiments are. Same thing with Islam. It's not difficult. It doesn't take much education, much investigation to see how contradictory these ideologies are, even with themselves. Even with themselves. The Muslims who deny the existence of a temple in Jerusalem call Jerusalem Beit al-Maqdis. Beit al-Maqdis is the general Arab term for Jerusalem, the full word for the name of Jerusalem. Beit al-Maqdis. Who can tell us how you say temple in Hebrew? Beit
Beit
HaMikdash.
HaMikdash.
It's their cognates. They're obviously the same word. And if they would just read the oldest texts of Islamic literature, they would see clear explicit acknowledgement that the temple was in that location. There is no law in the Quran, there is no law in authentic hadith, authentic ancient Islamic tradition. There's no law that prohibits refurbishing or rebuilding in a greater grandeur a building that marks that spot of holiness. There's no contradiction. The only contradiction is in pre-existing Jew hatred, right? So how can we do it most quickly? Well, those who would most oppose it know the answer. That's with a bomb. But because we are not nutcases, homicidal hypocrites, and we care about archaeology, we would want to do it in a careful way. And we could even relocate that structure. But first and foremost, it's never going to happen until the Jewish people as a whole peacefully elect leaders who have their priorities straight, who care more about the well-being of the Jewish people and Jewish identity than they care about keeping the United States and Europe and the Arab Gulf states happy. So that's where our priority needs to be. And it really starts with Torah learning. So when we get our Torah learning back in track, when we prioritize things correctly, we're learning the written Torah and the oral Torah, and we're no longer distracted by legends and by speculations about ambiguous aspects of prophecy, but we're focused on our basic duties. When we've revived that among ourselves, our people will get back in line, right? And when our teachers, when the rabbis are not doing this, then it's our duty as lay people, it's our duty to take away their funds and support those who do have their priorities straight, right? And that's not going to be one single individual or one organization. We're a nation. But when you see that your leaders are not in track, then it's the duty of the populace, of the masses, to then take away their support and support those who do have their priorities straight, right? So it's a two-party responsibility. And when we get that responsibility right, things are going to fall in place. Sha'Elah haba'ah.
Ella Haba'a. This is a fun one. Michael on Facebook would like to know more about the Star of David. Is there solid biblical truth of any association with past and present pagan gods? And if so, how could Israel choose it to put on their flag? I'm asking sincerely because I don't know. I love Israel. However, there's a lot I don't know.
Okay, can you summarize that, but maybe read the first part of it again?
Yeah, he's wanting to know about the kosherness of using the star. Is it have a pagan past that makes it not usable?
Okay.
I think, and it's being modern use.
Okay. As far as like solid evidence for it being used in a kosher way historically, if I'm not mistaken, there is little to no evidence that it was given any significance in Jewish tradition until sometime in the Middle Ages. And I think it's the late Middle Ages, if I remember correctly.
Is there any mention, because I've heard this, and I don't know if it's accurate, maybe just discussion, midrash, that the staff of David had a pomegranate on top, which, is
pomegranates do have that
Right.
shape on the top. And
of course on the high priest garment, pomegranate and a bell, pomegranate and a bell.
Yes. Yeah, but assuming if they're if they're dangling from the bottom, then the star shape would be facing down. But it would mean that there's no inherent prohibition on having that shape. But it's also difficult to argue from silence. I mean, I think the only argument you can make really from silence is that whatever it was that existed in the past, even if something maybe hypothetically did exist, that if we don't see any evidence of it, then it didn't have enough impact to leave evidence currently visible. So it's really difficult to make an argument pro or against from silence. And that's not what I'm going to do. What I will do is something more broad, and that is it permitted or forbidden to make use of the Star of David for ornamentation purposes, right? For artistic purposes. The answer to that, I would say, is that it would be permitted to use the Star of David regardless of whether or not the ancient Israelites used it in a kosher way. And it would be acceptable to use it as an ornamentation, whether or not pagans used it in paganism, regardless. The reason for that is that an object in its abstract form, meaning not a tangible specific item, but the abstract form of it, does not inherently become forbidden just because idolaters did it, right? An act only becomes forbidden in relation to idolaters having engaged in that act only if you do that act with intent to become similar to the nations, right? Well, there's twofold. If the act is explicitly forbidden in the Torah, it's forbidden regardless of your intent. It's forbidden, okay? If the Torah forbids it. And then if the Torah doesn't forbid it, then the act becomes forbidden if you're doing it in an effort to be similar to the idolaters. And it goes without saying, if the act involves violating any of the other commandments of the Torah, then needless to say, you can't do it if it involves violation of any of the other commandments of the Torah. But a mere drawing of a Star of David, what prohibition does that involve? The only way that could be inherently prohibited is if you, in your act of drawing it, you have intent that you're doing it to be similar to idolaters, or if you're drawing the Star of David and for you, you intend that that is an act of worship to some false god. But if you don't have intent to make yourself similar to idolaters by doing it, and you don't draw it as an act of worship to a false god, then it's not forbidden. And there are those who would forbid anything that they learn non-Jews or pagans have done. If they learn any kind of custom that a pagan had, they feel that it's forbidden to do anything similar to that. There are people who like this, and I feel bad for people like that because, one, they expose their ignorance of the vast diversity of pagan customs throughout history and currently. And as a consequence, they essentially forbid themselves everything, because nearly anything you do, an idolater has done in some way or another, right? Whether it's the shape of a Star of David, I can't prove that idolaters were using it in biblical times, but it's reasonable to assume they probably used stars of David. You know, they probably didn't call that a Star of David. I mean, I'm sure they didn't call it a Star of David, but they probably used that geometric shape because it's a simple shape. In the same way that they also used circles. I know they use circles. So you don't want to ever use a circle? You know, good luck trying to draw a human form without using round shapes.
I could see that it's used as a way of hatred, even to be mean or negative to the Jews, to say that was pagan.
Oh yeah,
And
there are people who
even-
try to find anything to delegitimize the Jewish people, but there are also people who are simply, they realize that they were deceived in the past, and now they're just extra cautious. And it's possible to get so cautious that you reach a level of paranoia. So we've given you the basic principles that you need to have in the forefront of your mind to avoid transgression. If doing an action, whether it's a Star of David, any other object or shape or any other action, if it's explicitly forbidden in the Torah, then you shouldn't do it. You don't need to speculate. All you need to do is see, is it one of the 613 commandments? And how did our sages, the ancient sages of Israel, understand it? Did they say anything explicit about a Star of David? No, they didn't. There is a mention of a star that was used in association with idolatry, I think in the book of Amos. It doesn't specify a specific shape, and you could draw stars in all sorts of different shapes. To say that specifically the Star of David is a massive leap. There's no archaeological evidence that the Israelites were specifically worshiping a Star of David, and even if they were, that wouldn't make the shape itself forbidden. It would make it forbidden to use a Star of David in an effort to identify with those idolaters. But if you're using a Star of David simply as general ornamentation with no connection to worshiping a foreign god, then there's nothing prohibited in it. Otherwise, you're forbidding all shapes.
Was that
idolaters have used all shapes, not just the Star of David. Go to any church. Go to any in Hinduism. Go to any Hindu temple. You're going to see not just shapes of stars. You're going to see all sorts of shapes. Why are you obsessing just with this one shape? It sounds to me like a person who does that is giving undue value to this one particular shape, almost like they're inadvertently worshiping the star themselves because of their great fear of it. Yes, sir.
Rabbi, was it worship of a representation of a star, like a drawing, or was it worship of a star in the heavens,
It could have been
of which we
more,
have the term worshiper of stars?
Yes, it's more likely that they were worshiping a specific star, a literal star. But
Right.
it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
Which is a round fiery ball.
Because that doesn't mean that you're now forbidden to take a photograph of the sky because the star that someone worshipped appeared in the photograph. No. Things that naturally exist do not become forbidden just because someone worshipped it. Things that do not naturally exist, which are modified by the human hand, once they are worshipped, become forbidden, unless the worshiper of that object neglected it, gave some indication of their abandoning that idolatry. Then even the modified object becomes permitted. But if an object that was worshipped, which is not naturally occurring, if an object that was worshipped has no indication that the worshippers abandoned it, then you're not permitted to benefit from it. That's it. Sha'ila haba'a. Next question.
Sha'ila haba'ah.
All right. In summary, there is no general prohibition on any shape, unless it is a shape that is you've created that shape, intentionally patterning it after a shape of idolatry, and nobody's doing that with the Star of David. If they are, then for them it's a prohibition, but it's not a general prohibition. Yeah.
Like the was it the cross that like Hitler used?
Yeah, the swastika.
Swastika, thank you.
Yeah, the broken cross. Yeah. It's a mistake to think that because Hitler's idiots were using the swastika, and still do, that therefore when you see it in India, the same shape, that they intend the same thing. Of course not. It's ridiculous. Context, people, context. And otherwise, you cannot do anything. You can't write the alphabet because you have a cross. Seriously, like common sense. All right, Sha'ila haba'a.
Sha'ila haba'ah. Leah on Facebook asks, in the Torah, women had prominent roles. Devorah was a judge. Miriam was able to sing and play instruments. Why now are women not able to be cantors or rabbis and not allowed to sing in shul like everybody else? Why can't we even make an aliyah to the bima?
Oh, wonderful question. Okay, number one, to just put it out there, there's certainly room for greater participation of women in synagogue services within the bounds of classical Jewish law, within the bounds of halacha. There is greater room. But that does not change the fact that one has to respect the local practices and customs. When you come from another location and you join them, it's unreasonable to expect that they're just going to conform to the demands of a newcomer. It's unreasonable, and honestly is kind of presumptuous, it's pompous. It sounds entitled. But I would agree that there's more that could be done. And each community has to decide with their leaders and their scholars what is the what are the limits of that flexibility. But I can tell you from my own reading that there is some degree of room that could be given. But as for the example of Devorah and Miriam taking leadership roles in biblical times, yeah, absolutely, they had leadership roles, but we also would be disingenuous. We would be intellectually dishonest to act as if their roles as women in leadership roles were the norm in biblical times. It is abundantly obvious that women in leadership roles, while they did exist, were not the norm for a woman to be in a leadership role over men. Over women could certainly have been the norm. There's simply no, it doesn't talk about it. Generally, the Torah and the Bible in general is talking about the nation as a whole. And generally speaking, it's quite clear that that was not the norm, that there were women in leadership roles over men. And there were also not men in leadership roles over women in a very personal way either. We don't see that either. Usually a male leader over the people has a leadership role over women indirectly through the husband, right? A married woman is not usually going to be under the direct tutelage of a man who she's not married to. So that's that. The question of, go ahead.
I was going to bring up in the temple, you're not
Yes.
going to see women slaughtering animals, women splashing the blood on the altar, going into the holy place, bringing in the showbread, offering the incense, whether they want to or not. And you're not going to see 95% of Israel doing it because there's
Right.
very, very, very specific roles that
Yeah.
have to do it. And
Yeah.
can't change that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you could change it, but that would be a different Torah. You know, you're just making up stuff just because you
Making up stuff.
It didn't scratch
Yeah.
your itch and you feel entitled to do more.
Yeah.
But the question of whether a woman can be in a leadership role, yes, there is precedence for it, for sure.
Sure.
But that it be pushed as a norm, as some people do, that it be pushed as like an ideal, as is done in the Western world today. You don't see that in the Torah. It may be this, there are reasons for that, and there's room for discussing maybe why today is different. I can give you a few examples. Simply education, because with advancements in modern technology, gender roles do not have to be by practical coercion, right? Sometimes practical reality, just the reality on the ground, forces certain realities. So historically, the reality on the ground was you couldn't just go to the store down the street and buy already baked bread, right? You had to have established roles for the sake of organization and optimized production in any system. You have to have clear roles. But once you have pre-baked bread available, you no longer have to have women grinding the bread, which is something, it's a labor that can be done while the child is playing nearby, right? So historically, women would be baking bread every day, and they would be doing other tasks. They weren't lazy, but they would be busy doing other tasks that were able to be done while taking care of children. Whereas men would be doing tasks that are more difficult to do if children are around. And that freed the man's mind more to review of Torah. So while they're working, they would be reviewing Torah orally. They would have vast amounts of the Torah and legal, like the Psalms and the Mishnah memorized, and they'd be reviewing it while they're working. Women did not have a practical ability to do that while children are playing around. It didn't mean that they were forbidden to do it, but they were not obligated to do it because of their priorities with taking care of kids. Nowadays, with modern advancements, which are not a reality in every place on earth, but for most of us in the Western world, it is, women don't have to do all the things that they were historically doing, right? And if they're not doing those things, then what are they doing? So it's not good to have an empty void. Usually when you leave empty voids, no responsibilities, less than ideal things start to pop up. So if you're living in a world of abundance, it's better to find some kind of job that you can do. And obviously in the Western world, we don't have to say it because it's so pushed. It's good for a woman to have some kind of an occupation. I think it's best that it not be with a male boss over her. I don't think that's ideal. I'm not saying that you're violating a Torah prohibition, but it could lead to a Torah prohibition. And it also, whether or not it has to be, I think it often leads to some kind of resentment toward the husband, especially, and it can also lead for the husband to have resentment toward the wife. It can go both ways, either because the wife feels she's working harder than the husband, so she may have less respect, or the husband feels jealous and feels insecure. You know, it can go both ways. I don't think that's ideal, but sometimes you may need to be in an unideal situation temporarily. But if you could avoid it, I think it's best to avoid a woman having a male boss and to avoid a male having a female boss. It's not good. It's not good.
So as for a leader in a synagogue, let's say it was a woman, to me, it reminds me of if, let's just say I'm at a service in a synagogue and there's a Levite that's there and he's always the first one to pop up for the Aliyah. But all of a sudden this day there's a Cohen. Well, we now allow the Cohen to go first
Right.
because that's proper protocol. And if
Correct.
the woman is the one who's available to lead because
If
no one
she
else
for
is
sure,
capable,
exactly. If she for sure is more qualified than anyone else, then absolutely she should be leading. But we need to also remember, and this is a misnomer in the broader Orthodox world as well, not in the sources, but just in the reality on the ground. This idea of one single congregational rabbi is not classical Judaism. This is kind of patterned after the norm that came to be in Christianity. Yes, sometimes it's a practical necessity that you just have one because nobody else is qualified. But ideally, you do not have just one leader over a community. Ideally, you would have 10. Ideally, at least 10. Not just for prayers, but you would have 10 people who are always occupied with the needs of the community at the synagogue, and they're scholars. In their free time, they're learning. And otherwise, they're only busy with maintaining the synagogue, the premises, teaching. That's ideal. After that, you would have at least three scholars on a local level. Not just two, but three. Having just one congregational rabbi is not ideal. But if all you have is a woman, absolutely, she should lead. But if she is a good and true and qualified and sincere leader, she's also going to make sure that she's teaching some man in the area so he can be brought up to par, and then they can work together as a team. And then with time, I know this sounds anti-feminist, I'm sorry, over time, she will kind of hide in the background, or she will go to some other place where she may be needed. But ideally, you absolutely will always have women teachers, but they will not be teaching men. They will be teaching women. Right? The same way that ideally, right, and this kind of is an equality. It's in the same way that ideally men will not be teaching a group of women. Men will be teaching men, women will be teaching women. And then there may be some general class, but it's not ideal that you would have a woman in a group of men or a man in a big group of women. Right? That's not ideal. Excuse me. Right? There are always going to be exceptional cases, right? Sometimes b'di'avad, sometimes what is not generally ideal becomes ideal in an unideal situation, right? But we would never take those and say this is the standard that we should aim for. Sometimes it's just the best that you have, and we should be thankful for what we have while aiming for improvement. It's not wise, and it's contrary to the ways of Torah to deny differences between the sexes. It's a denial of the Torah, and it's a denial of reality. It's a denial of reality, right? That will exist whether or not the Torah were in existence. That would be the reality, even hypothetically that there were no God. It's a reality. And denial of reality is, in a sense, a denial of God, who is the bedrock of reality. Sha'ala haba'ah.
got a good one here. Hershey on Facebook. can you convene a rabbinical court and kick all the Jews who side with the enemies of the Jews out of the Jewish people?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question because it also is it demands several assumptions and conclusions. It assumes that one already knows what are the required qualifications for a legitimate Jewish court,
Oh.
and it also, in order to answer it, you need to know what is the definition of a Jew, right?
Yeah.
Or should we say
Can anyone
definitions?
do it? Or let's just say the quick answer is no. We can't all just get a quick group up and form this a real court that would be qualified. But let's say the Sanhedrin exists. Can they say, you people who are siding with the enemies and putting on those garments, whatever that the Palestinians wear, who are saying we shouldn't be in the land, can they be kicked out of the Jewish people?
Well, it depends on what you mean by kicked out of the Jewish people.
No.
So let's explain what we mean by that. Many people have heard the idea of once a Jew, always a Jew, kind of like once saved, always saved. But the difference is that in the context of Protestant Christianity, Baptist or Calvinist ideas of once saved, always saved, it has to do with the relationship with God, excuse me, exclusively. But being a Jew is not only about your relationship with God, but also about your relationship with a real human nation. In the legal context of the Torah, which God has authorized, a person who is born into the people of Israel is always culpable to the covenant of Torah between God and Israel, regardless of what he believes or what he does. He's always culpable. That means he's always an Israelite or a Jew with regard to his culpability, with regard to his obligations in the covenant. But that does not mean that he is always a Jew or always an Israelite in a relational sense, in the sense of who or how he associates with the people of Israel. So he will always be culpable, meaning if he denies the Torah or he stops keeping Shabbat, he's still going to be liable to the Torah, liable to the covenant, regardless of what he thinks or believes. But with regard to how we as a nation relate to him, if he denies the Torah, rejects the Torah, and associates with our enemies, we relate to him as if he is not an Israelite. Only with regard to a handful of matters is he still distinct from the non-Jewish nations. If he Maqadesh Isha, if he sanctifies a woman for marriage, that requires that she would accept it, of course, then his marriage with her would be considered legally binding in the context of Torah. But we're not supposed to relate to him as if he's an Israelite. We're supposed to relate to him as if he is not an Israelite, generally speaking, with regard to just a few things. And that is until he repents, right? Once he repents, then he comes back into the fold. There would still be some limits, believe it or not, but generally speaking, he's able to come back into the fold. He's always held liable. That means he's liable to the death penalty, regardless of what he believes. We only have a death penalty if we have a functioning Supreme Court of Israel and the temple services occurring. So if we don't have the services in the national temple in Jerusalem, we don't have death penalty. But he's still liable to death penalties. And if he's actively an enemy of the people of Israel, then in self-defense, he can be killed just like any other non-Israelite. And even if he's not a heretic, if a member of the covenant of Torah comes to you and you know he's seeking your death, even if he's not denying the Torah, but he's just enraged, you can also kill him if it's necessary to protect your life. So really, in that regard, with self-defense, it doesn't matter whether or not someone is considered part of the Jewish people or not. But our sages have already declared that a person whose legal status is that of Israel, whether he's a convert or native born, if he is handing the Jewish people over to our enemies, whether to be slaughtered or to be enslaved, he has a death penalty on his head, right? He has sided with the enemies. He has cut himself off from the people of Israel, right? So he's still an Israelite, he's still a Jew in the sense of liability, but in the sense of his association, he's cut off his association. He's now part of the enemy, you know, and worse. He's worse than the enemy. Right? He's more dangerous. That's the way in which he's worse. He's more liable because he should know better, and he's more dangerous because he knows things about us and he knows more of our weaknesses than a regular enemy may. The end. Sha'Allah haba. All right, before we move on to the next question, do any of our members here have any questions regarding anything that we've touched on so far?
I do.
Bakhalud, go right ahead.
So I know Pesach is it's shortcoming. I guess one question for me is if I want to make my own matzah, I think I heard that there's a restriction that you could only have the dough sitting no more than 18 minutes or something like that. Otherwise, it becomes unfit.
Yes.
I just want to hear your advice on that.
So the opinion regarding being 18 minutes is based on a errant printing of the Talmud. If you want to be strict, you can certainly be strict, but once you know that it's based on an error, I'm not sure that's really called being strict. I think it's called just making a mistake, especially if you're causing people to be extremely stressed with their finances and between families unnecessarily. You know, I think that's what's called a mistake, not being strict. If you want to know more about that, you can find some articles and also some lectures by Rabbi David Bar Hayim. We can write that in the text box and also in our WhatsApp and Telegram group, where he discusses this topic specifically. Suffice it to say, if you are making your own matzot at home, your own unleavened bread at home, as long as you're not leaving it out for a really long period of time, and you're just trying to use it to make dough on the spot, as long as you're still kneading it, okay? Even if you stopped kneading it, but like, let's say, I don't know, 30 minutes passed, it's not rised, right? Then you can resume kneading it and prolong it that way. You don't have to worry about doing everything within 18 minutes. Even if you were going to be going by the 18-minute rule, as long as you're kneading the dough, the 18 minutes continues to extend indefinitely. And that's according to all opinions. Even the strictest, most extreme opinions hold that. So if you have at least two people, you know, it's really not a difficult thing. Also, if you use fruit juice instead of water, according to Maimonides, according to the Rambam, it doesn't take on the status of forbidden leavened bread, as long as you use grape juice.
No, because I tried it and
but
18 minutes is just not long enough to get it through. You know, it's like you have to use machines, I guess, at that point.
No, but the 18 minutes is 18 minutes of the dough resting, not doing anything. If you made the dough and you didn't do anything with it for 15 minutes, and then you came back and kneaded it again, you automatically give yourself another 18 minutes. Right? That's according to all opinions. That's according to even the uninformed opinions, let's put it that way. So, yeah, if you're using something like a spaghetti maker, you do want to make sure this is continually being used. Otherwise, you need to rinse it out because little pieces that get stuck in there indefinitely would turn into hametz. But this is all assuming that you're using one of the 5 grains. Things such as legumes, they don't become hametz. Even the Ashkenazi practice of avoiding legumes on Passover, any educated Ashkenazi Jew who does not eat legumes on Passover will readily admit to you that it is not technically hametz, but that is their own custom of stringency, a stringency which they themselves know is not with regard to actual forbidden hametz. Leave that to them, but just putting it out there. So anything you do with legumes, you don't have to be concerned about this either. So making bread out of legumes is pretty easy as well, and more healthy, to be honest. I really recommend that in general. Use as few refined grains as possible in general, and you're better off. So Rabbi David Bar Chaim. You can find him on YouTube and perhaps also Spotify. I'm not sure, but for sure YouTube you can find him. And also his students have Facebook groups, and they also have a WhatsApp group where he frequently shares new articles and lectures. And he has several videos and articles on this topic specifically regarding the 18 minutes and how that's based on a textual error in some of the early printing presses.
Thank you.
Any other questions about any topic? Go
Outside
ahead.
of the time, what about using grains from previous? Can you use grains that weren't grown in Israel from
Yeah,
this?
you can use it. Of course.
Even outside of the Passover meal itself?
They weren't grown in Israel? Of course you can use them, yeah.
Well, it's this year's grain, in other words.
Especially if they weren't grown in Israel, you can use it. Especially. You're thinking of Yashan. I know what you're thinking of.
Well, I've assumed that I can't use matzah from the year before. I have to use matzah that came from this year's crop for the Passover.
You're gonna have to find a source to show me about that, so I can see what you're talking about.
I'll let Heather Google it.
Okay.
Okay.
So Rabbi David Bar Hayim, look up his lectures regarding the time limits for preparing unleavened bread, asa, at home. Make Torah affordable again.
Yes. I found him. Thank you.
All right, Makef. Maybe someone can leave a link to his YouTube page. All right, Sha'elah Haba'ah, if we don't have any members here who have any input or questions themselves. Going once, going twice. Any questions, you guys?
Sha'elah Haba. Robert is asking about recipes for a diabetic challah, and of course, I guess to add to that would be the blessings, depending on what the ingredients were.
Okay. Well, we do not actually have, per classical Jewish tradition, we do not have a duty to eat unleavened bread all the days of Passover. That may be a shocker to some people. They're like, what? That's what it's all about. It's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, so we call it the Feast of Unleavened Bread because the general availability at the time was of bread made from one of the 5 grains. And because we were only permitted to eat unleavened bread during those days, so people were eating a lot of unleavened bread during Passover. However, the obligation for the duration of Passover is that we not eat leavened bread. There's a difference between saying you should not eat leavened bread as opposed to saying you must eat unleavened bread. So there is no commandment that you must eat unleavened bread all the days of Passover. The commandment is simply that you not eat leavened bread. But if you prefer to not eat any bread at all, that's okay. You don't have to eat any kind of bread, right? So you don't have to worry about, if diabetes, for example, you don't have to worry about it impacting you throughout the days of Passover because you don't have to eat matzah. It's just that you should not eat grain products that are leavened. There is an obligation to actually eat matzah, but that is only from the Torah, only on the first day. And that's really only in the first night, okay? During the Passover Seder, the Leil Seder. And that's only an average olive-sized portion. That's a very small amount. I really don't think, unless you're in a really extreme situation with your diabetes, I don't think that for the average person, just one little olive-sized portion of unleavened bread is going to have a terrible impact, especially if you don't eat it on an empty stomach. That might help you. If you have something slow digesting and also make sure that it's whole grain. That can also help you.
I would think that the larger concern would be an allergic reaction if you're an
If you
olive
have any
size
kind of
amount.
serious health issue with regard to eating unleavened bread, then you are not obligated to eat it. This is a general rule for keeping Torah. You are exempt from any commandment of the Torah if doing that will cause you injury. Any commandment. So this is not canceling the Torah. To keep Torah, to keep God's word does not mean that you are perpetually always doing every single aspect of it. To keep Torah means that you have accepted it upon you. You embrace it in your heart. You hold it dear. That's what it means to keep Torah. Keeping Torah does not mean you are doing every single thing, right? We need to separate these two concepts. People typically think keeping Torah and doing Torah are one and the same. They're not. They're not one and the same. They're interconnected because one leads to the other when possible, but you are able to keep the entire Torah without ever doing some of the commandments, and you're still keeping the entire Torah, because keeping the entire Torah does not mean doing a specific act. Keeping the Torah is a state of mind and a state of heart. That is keeping the Torah. A mind frame and a state of the heart that when you are able, you do the best of your ability. If you are unable, it doesn't mean you're canceling the Torah. It means you're still keeping it, but you're simply prevented from expressing it in action in the fullest way. But that does not detract from the fact that you're still keeping the entire Torah. You keep it where? In your heart. That's where you're keeping the Torah. And that's not cliche. That means your heart is surrendered to the will of God. Okay? And it is God's will that you would live with his Torah, not that you will kill yourself with it. God forbid. Right? And it's the same way with someone who, heaven forbid, would not have arms. He's not breaking the Torah by not putting on tefillin. He's not breaking the Torah by not helping his neighbor with the burden that his donkey is falling under because he has no arms. What's he going to do? Right? He's not breaking the Torah. If a man is incapable of reproducing with a woman, he's not violating. You should be fruitful and multiply. It's the person who is capable, who knowingly and intentionally disregards a commandment, even though he is able to do it. That is the person who's violating the Torah, not one who, for no fault of his own, is unable. That's a very important thing to do. Okay, I believe Mr. Victor has some announcement to make. Shavua Tov, Teresa.
Thanks for being with us. A few people dropped off. So we have an announcement. And if everybody was familiar with themissionalwalk.com, the website we had that is now been replaced by missionalwalk.com. Drop the word "the" and you have just missionalwalk.com. If you do go to the old page or old site, it'll redirect you. If you go to an old post, it'll take you right to the post on the new site. So everything's still there. And it's maybe you could share what people will be learning and what new options we have that we never really talked about Gior before, but maybe we could share a little bit about that.
About Giur?
Yep.
All right.
Through
Well,
the website.
Giur refers to the formal legal association and joining of the people of Israel, right? And to be clear, we're not referring to gaining legal citizenship with the state of Israel, although it is sort of indirectly related, but it's not synonymous, because the people of Israel as a people, as a nation, is not absolutely synonymous with the modern secular state of Israel. Indisputably connected, interrelated, but they are not the same. So the majority of the Jewish people in the United States, for example, are not legally citizens of the state of Israel, but they are absolutely full members of the nation of Israel as a living historical nation. And so when we say Giyur, Geeyur, when we say Giyur, we mean the act of immigrating unto the people of Israel. So becoming a member of the people of Israel. And because for many people it is outside their ability to just up and move to an established Jewish community, there needs to be, and it's our duty to provide, an option for people to officially, formally associate with the historical people of Israel, even in cases where they are not immediately able to uproot and join the people of Israel. Right? Not doing so is a failure on our part. It is not sufficient to simply throw them the crumbs of the laws of Noah, keep the seven, go to heaven. Most people who want to join the people of Israel, who want to keep Torah, are not concerned about just getting into heaven. They're not just looking for a free ticket to heaven. They're looking for how they can fill their lives with meaning in accordance with God's word, how they can most align themselves with God's ways, walk in his ways, and keep his commandments, because they've already entered into that covenant between themselves and God on a personal level. And they want to make it a actual legal social reality with the historical people of Israel. And if we do not provide an avenue for people to do that, even where they are at, then we risk not only the development of new religions, because what do people do when they don't have a connection with the historical people of Israel, and they don't know how to learn? They wing it, they improvise, they end up creating their own holidays and then their own calendars, and then they're in competition with the people of Israel. And then over the centuries, they view the Jewish people as the illegitimate, and we are the true, right? We are the replacement. We are shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't provide an alternative, all right? We are not saying that this is ideal, an ideal situation, but it's an even less ideal situation to leave things as they are and continue to have seeds sprout of new religions. People who are well-intentioned, but they're, practically speaking, are creating new religions. That's what these different messianic groups are. That's what these different pseudo-Karaite or neo-Karaite groups are. They're all kinds of Black Hebrew Israelites. They're all doing the same thing. Because we are failing at providing them an avenue, they're just doing the best they can, but end up reinventing the wheel of replacement theology. So there will be multiple avenues. There'll be multiple possibilities that we're going to give, which will connect you to the people of Israel, the historical people of Israel. There will be an option for full joining of the people of Israel through a full conversion, which includes a commitment that you will either eventually move into an established Jewish community, or you will make real efforts to plant the seeds and foment those seeds, water those seeds to establish a community around you. And we will do our best to help you with that and connect you to other people who will help you with that. That is the one avenue. And then there will be another avenue of, I guess, for lack of a better word, you could say a sort of Noahide faith that is not just a free-for-all or a winging it, but that will give you actual instruction, meaningful connection to the people of Israel, even if not as full members of the Jewish people, but as recognized and respected and valued allies and fellow members of the faith of the God of Abraham, right? In a structured way, in an official way. That you can, if you go to some community, you can say to the rabbi there or people there, I'm in an official association with legitimate leaders of and teachers of Israel. I'm not just making my own thing, right? This is the only way that we can prevent Inquisition 3.0 or Jihad 5.0. It's the only way. History repeats itself. And if we don't learn from it, we're doomed to repeat it. 100% it's going to happen. So now is the time, because people are gaining access to information that they never had before, but they don't know what to do with everything. And the Jewish people as a whole are not equipped to take in masses of people just flooding into their communities. So no one else, or not enough people, are providing alternatives, so we're going to do the best we can. Can it be improved? Yeah, we will continually be improving. Any rabbis who learn of us, who want to help us, will be more than welcome. Be'ezrat Hashem, strength in numbers. But we're not going to just sit back and wait for something to happen that nobody's standing up, stepping in front to take on the responsibility. There are other Noahide groups, sort of organizations that already exist, but they're, number one, they're not enough, and number two, the majority of those organizations are not exactly what you could call classical Orthodox Judaism. They are traditional in some ways, but very, very untraditional in some pretty fundamental ways, such as, yes, they may be very strict in certain commandments, but they have replaced idol X with idol Y. They have replaced praying to created being number one with praying to created being number two. That's no good. So we need a true alternative, not just to conversion, to full joining the people of Israel, but we need an alternative for those people who maybe don't feel ready yet, but do want to ally with the Jewish people without idolatry, without idolizing a human being. There's little to no such organization. So that's
And that's probably where we come in the best, is trying to reveal what's a zero tolerance item, avodah zarah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter
which is-
what his name is. Doesn't matter what he looks like or when he lived. Makes no difference, right? And God is one, and he's exclusive in his love for his people and demands exclusive love back, that we will not serve any other with religious rituals or prayers, any other but he. Baruch Hu, Baruch Shema. Right? En kamohu, and there is none comparable to him, none other worthy of prayers. The moment you pray to someone who you have no physical connection with, you're praying from your heart, you're crying out from your heart. The moment you do that, you're ascribing to that entity, whatever it is, a degree of true divinity. Only one who is not bound by time and space can receive the prayers of all those that cry to him. That they may say with their mouth, "Oh, but I don't think he's God," but in your action, by praying to them, you're ascribing a level of exaltation and divinity that belongs to God alone, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's Jesus or whether it's Shabtai Tzvi, a false Messiah. It doesn't matter whether it's Nanach, Rebbe of Nachman of Breslov, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Rebbe Melubavitch, the Lubavitch or Chabad rabbi. It doesn't matter if it's any number of future even righteous people to come. It doesn't matter, all right? This is the most basic level of Torah, that we serve God alone in accordance with his commandments. To take his commandments and be as strict as possible, but to do it to the service of something else, is the most audacious form of idolatry. That is the most audacious form of idolatry. You've taken what was uniquely his and you're giving it to something else. We will not do that. We will not tolerate that. And that is not legitimate Noahide observance either. So if you know anyone who is interested in joining the people of Israel formally, officially, and they're not near a Jewish community, or you know anybody who maybe doesn't feel ready to formally take upon the entire Torah, but they do want to serve the God of Israel, tell them about us. Let them know. Let them know. It's a big mitzvah. Tizku el mitzvah.
Would you say that Mishnah is unique in its ability to understand where the people, say in Hebrew roots, Messianic Judaism, where their questions are coming from? Because everyone's going to have questions, but maybe those outside of the Christianity will have different questions. So Judaism
Correct.
really isn't equipped to even answer the questions generally.
The majority of rabbis, with the best of intentions and the greatest of scholarship, have little to no knowledge, firsthand knowledge of what the New Testament actually says, or what different Christians from different backgrounds believe. They have little to no knowledge. Basically, all they know is that Christians worship Jesus, and and many sincere rabbis think that all that means is that they hate Jews, because that's been about all their experience with Christians in their community's history. And that is not our position, because we have a more informed background. Every rabbi and every person has their own strengths and own weaknesses, and that's why we need each other. So it is our strength that at least those founding members of Mishnah Walk are intimately familiar with Christianity of various forms and denominations, as well as with the Messianic movements, plural, because there are different types of Messianic or people that call themselves Messianics, with some substantial differences between them that the average Orthodox rabbi, no matter how sincere, is oblivious to. Or it could also be that some of them, because of emotional pain, maybe if they hear of these differences, it's irrelevant to them because their emotional animosity prevents them from hearing the sincerity in the voice of someone who's truly seeking, but from that background. So we do have not just an advantage, but extra qualification that the majority of rabbinic leadership do not have, and they do not have. And they could have it, but and it's not that they are ill-intentioned by not having it, but they're already overwhelmed with many other responsibilities. It's just what it is. I think that there could be an increase in education in rabbinic leadership regarding Christianity, but it's certainly not the priorities as it is, for better or worse. So that's what we're here for.
All right, and so there'll be
Yes, sir.
a course to go over the basics of idolatry, just the things that we want to make sure that people understand to take these further steps, which are very basic, very simple, as you already laid out earlier in this. But there are things that kind of make it, well, no, not everyone can come in because they still have something that they haven't been able to understand fully and release.
Or they may be able to be an ally of the people of Israel, and we can recognize them, as someone who does not worship anything other than God, though maybe they still have questions about halachic authority and the oral law, right? So maybe they don't embrace the concept of the oral law, but they are very clear and seeing eye to eye with us with regard to not worshiping anything other than the Creator, blessed be He. So we can acknowledge that as well. We can have different certificates for different things, right? Not a one size fits all. Yes, sir.
And you'll be teaching Hebrew in the Mishnah Walk. You'll have regular classes there, and you'll be available to answer any questions with those who are looking to join the people of Israel. And should I join them? What's giving their personal situation, and can see if there's any problems.
Right.
You can address that.
Anybody have any questions about this before we end it for today? And there are certainly a number of different practical questions one could ask regarding this. I guess we answered all the questions.
We have a few more to ask, but that'll be for next time.
All right.
So Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, maybe Telegram. If you have any questions, you can drop them there.
Absolutely.
And okay.
All right. So we're going to end off with our prayer of gratitude that we say when we leave a house of study. And so ideally, this is what we would say as we're leaving a place where we have learned. All right. Mi haba.
Ani haba.
Hola, kavod.
Modeh ani lefpanecha Hashem Elohai.
Okay, let's go ahead and translate. I'm grateful before you, O eternal, my God. If you want to continue, b'chavod.
Shasimka.
Sam. The line is always an ah.
Subsamta.
ששמת,
ששמת.
חלקי,
חלפי,
חלקי, Q like queen, חלקי.
חלקי, מי יושבה,
יושבה,
יושבה.
Yeah, the two dots under a letter is like EH.
All right, I missed the dot over the shin, so
Sometimes if you have a holam,
Uh-huh.
sometimes if you have a
Right.
O vowel immediately before a shin, the O is supposed to be understood as doubling as the right-hand side dot, right? Miyoshve, Beth.
מיושבי בית המקדש.
One more time, read it slowly, syllable by syllable.
Midrash.
You got it. Beth HaMidrash. All right. So I'm grateful before you, O eternal my God, that you have placed my portion among those who dwell in the house of study. Mi haba. Mi haba. Who's next?
אני הבאה.
כל הכבוד.
ולא שמת חלקי מיושבי קורנוס.
All right. And I am grateful before you that you have not placed my portion among those who dwell on street corners.
שאני משכים והם משכימים.
You want to translate it? This root means getting up early. She is that.
And that I get up early and they get up early.
Exactly. שאני משכים והם משכימים. All right. Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba.
Mihaba
כל הכבוד.
says, Ani Mishkim.
All right. If we have the line under a letter, it's always
Mashkim Ladiv Rai
re.
Ladivre Torah Vahem Mashki Mim
Beautiful. Mashkimim. Beautiful.
Lad
Lead.
Lead
Always an E.
Lead Barim Batelim.
Beautiful. You read really well. Kol hakavod. Lidvarim batalim. All right. For I get up early unto words of Torah, and they get up early unto empty matters. All right. Mi haba. Or Mi haba batur. Who is next in line? Mi haba batur. Mi haba batur. You can say tur sheli. My turn. Tur sheli.
Tur sheli.
Kol hakavod.
Ani amel vehem amelim.
Okay. I work hard and they work hard. Tamshichi. Continue. Tamshichi.
Ani amel vem kabel. Wum kabel. Sachar.
Sachar.
Sachar. Vehem amelim ve'ein. Mecca Belim.
Beautiful.
Shachar.
Sachar.
Sachar.
All right. Shachar is also a word. It's like morning, dawn. All right. I work hard and I receive reward. And they, those who sit idly on street corners, also work hard, but they don't receive reward. Mi haba. Mi haba. Mi haba batur. Tagidu, say, tur sheli. My turn. Tur sheli.
Tur sheli.
Kol hakavod.
Ani Ratz Wachem. Ratzim.
All right, this word ras has to do with running. So I run and they run.
They run.
נכון. תמשיך. Continue, תמשיך.
Ani ratz. Lechayi.
Haye. Haye.
Lechaye.
Anytime you see a yud that has a vowel above or below it, anytime you see the letter yud and you see a vowel associated with it, it will always be pronounced as a Y sound, then the vowel. Always. If you also see a dot in a yud, 100% certainty that it should be pronounced as a Y. Right? And we say that because sometimes yud, when there is no vowel around it, is just symbolic of a vowel sound, but without the Y sound. If you see a vowel above it or below it or a dot, then it's not just symbolizing a vowel, it's actually a Y, consonant Y. لحية. لحية. تمشيخ.
Lechaye. Ha-olam. Haba.
Right? I run into the life of the world to come.
Wahem.
Make sure you
Rats.
have no friction when you pronounce the letter Hey.
Wahem.
There you go.
Ratzom.
One more time.
Ratzim.
נכון. Hmm?
Leva.
What's the dot?
Leva. Lever.
Right? We need to make a break sound, the glottal stop.
Leave air.
That's it. Leave air.
Shahat.
Accent the first syllable.
Shahat.
נכון, شاحت. אני רוס لحيه علم هبا وهم روسين لغير شاحت. I run into the life of the world to come, but they're running into the pit of destruction. All right, who would like to close with personal prayer? It can be short and sweet. We should never think that the formalized prayers were intended to cancel spontaneous or personalized prayer. That's a widespread mistake we need to letapen to fix. Mi haba batur, who is next in line? Just thank God for the time that we spent together, and that God will open our eyes to the wonders of His Torah and to kindness, His kindness, with ourselves and toward those around us. If anyone wants to say that in their own words.
Thank you for this time together, and thank you for all the sustenance that you provide, for the shelter you provide, and for the time that you provide us. Help us to realize that time is more precious than anything else, and to use it wisely in pursuing righteousness and kindness. Amen.
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 Beautiful. Shavua tov lekulam. Everybody have a great week, and thank you very much. And chodesh tov. Don't forget, you can say that blessing over the new moon as soon as you see it.
Thank
Go
you.
to-
Shavua
Shavua
tov.
tov.
Exciting
Shavua tov.
news.
Toda rabah.